Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Kilkenny, even if for most you're only able to join us virtually. We're here in the Parade Tower in the grounds of Kilkenny Castle, and I have to say it's not a bad way to start a Thursday morning. We're joined by over 130 participants today from all over the island, from local government and government departments, from all grades and disciplines. You're all very welcome, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us, because it's your participation that will make today a success for all of us. A very special welcome to all our speakers who have put time and effort into preparing their contribution today to share their thoughts with us, and we look forward to hearing their contribution, and I hope you will find it worthwhile. Climate change and climate action have come centre stage in a relatively short number of years, and I think we all know it's here to stay at centre stage. I hope you find the morning session worthwhile, and as a former colleague of mine would say, if you take away at least one idea that you can bring back to work and help you in doing what you have to do to address climate change and the challenges ahead, it will be a worthwhile morning. Just a little bit of housekeeping, I suppose, to get us going. You will be muted throughout the session, but there will be an opportunity after the third session for questions and answers. So we'd ask that you put your questions in the chat box, and after session 3, John Kelpie will be chairing that session, and there'll be an opportunity for your questions to be put to the speakers. So do engage, because it's that engagement that will help us all to learn that little bit more. We will try stick to the time allotted, and we'll get to the coffee break hopefully at 10:40. John, as I say, will chair session 3, and all going to plan, we will finish at 12:30, and you'll all go to lunch feeling as if you've earned it. So hopefully you will have a good morning and enjoy it. Before I move into the conference in full, just to say as an aside, today is National Women's Enterprise Day, and there's over 2,000 female entrepreneurs celebrating today online. So if you want to follow that with hashtag NWED, please do. I mean, what a celebration to have that many people at an online event. So we'll get on with the morning, and firstly, I just want to convey an apology on behalf of Minister Eamon Ryan, TD, Minister for Environment, Climate and Communications, who is unable to contribute today due to time constraints. But I'm absolutely sure there will be many other opportunities in the future where Minister Ryan will be able to contribute, because this topic certainly isn't going away. So sincere apologies on behalf of our Minister, who genuinely, due to diary commitments, can't make a contribution this morning. So we're going to move swiftly ahead with our first input, which is an address from Edwin Poots, MLA, Minister for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Northern Ireland. So we'll just hand over now to have the input from Minister Poots.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak today at the All-Ireland Local Authority Climate Summit event, and I hope that since I last spoke at your webinar series last year, you're all well. In the last year, as many of you will be aware, there's been significant advances in climate policy in Northern Ireland and indeed at the UK level. December 2020 saw the publication of the UK's Climate Change Comprehensive 6th Carbon Budget Advice to Government, which attracted significant attention as for the first time the advice which accompanied the CCC's recommendations set out the UK's balanced pathway to achieving net zero by 2050. The past year has also seen the publication of the CCC's independent assessment of the risks of climate change to the UK. It is important that we also do not lose sight of the important role climate change adaptation has in tackling climate change, and unfortunately, only too often climate change mitigation steals the attention, but the impact of the climate change is still occurring, with the extreme weather events such as flooding, for which we need to ensure adequate preparations are put in place. I hope the adaptation discussions in the first session of today's event will help focus attention on the need for effective adaptation plans, and whilst I have touched on the CCC's advice, I look forward to being able to update you on significant policy developments my department has led over the past year. I think it's safe to say that interest in climate change has grown considerably in the past year, and in particular closer to home, with the UK being host and president of the COP26. A key finding from the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC report on the state of the planet is that human influence on global warming is unequivocal, with climate change already affecting every inhabited region across the globe, including many observed changes in weather and climate extremes. Agriculture, along with transport, energy and buildings, are the big emitters of greenhouse gases at this moment. And whilst this presents us with significant challenges, I believe there are many opportunities as well. For example, I believe that Northern Ireland has significant opportunities to contribute to further development of renewable energy. I want to see Northern Ireland producing all its energy needs from renewables, both on land and on sea, with the potential to export excess renewable energy production. I recognise that the delivery of changes needed will require investment from both the public and private sectors, and that's something which we'll be pressing ahead with. In addition to work on green growth and climate change adaptation, both of which I will come back to, a key focus of mine has been delivering on the commitment made in the New Decade New Approach Agreement to bring forward a Climate Change Act for Northern Ireland. I wrote to the Climate Change Committee last year to request advice on what Northern Ireland's equitable contribution to the UK net zero target would be, and received the advice in December 2020. The committee recommended clear, ambitious, evidence-based targets for Northern Ireland, which reflect the unique factors relevant to our capacity to reduce emissions through a balanced pathway. And having considered these recommendations and the policy analysis work undertaken by my officials, I was then able to bring forward and obtain the agreement of my executive colleagues to a draft climate change bill, which I subsequently introduced to the Assembly at the start of July. The targets in my bill are ambitious and challenging, and will be a key driver behind both my department and the executive's policies. The bill sets a target of at least 82% net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, with interim targets for 2030 and 40. And achieving these targets will help deliver the UK's commitment to climate change, as with Paris. My bill will help set Northern Ireland on a balanced pathway towards a sustainable, low-carbon economy in which key sectors can prosper through a just transition. The bill allows for emissions reduction targets to be modified should update advice recommend this, or if it is appropriate to do so as a result of significant scientific technological developments to climate change. I'm confident that such developments will take place and that we'll be in a position to make the target more ambitious in the future. The bill is therefore based on current evidence, but also future-proofed to allow us to react to positive developments. The bill also provides powers to bring forward future legislation on public body reporting in respect of climate change, and I think it's crucial that central government and local government are aligned in terms of efforts to address climate change and open to working cooperatively together in this area. This is an aspect of climate change mitigation and adaptation that I want to see developed further, and will be a priority for my department when we come to delivering on the bill. The bill also puts climate change at the forefront of politics in Northern Ireland, placing clear duties on all Northern Ireland departments to play their part in reducing emissions. And it's just past the second stage in the Assembly. This signals the momentum behind it. I'm confident that the bill will progress through the Assembly before the end of this mandate, and we can then move on to taking actions to deliver on the ambitions within it. It is particularly important in this year that the UK government hosts COP26, that we drive forward action to tackle climate change, to ensure that Northern Ireland, as part of the UK, leads by example in our actions on the global stage to deliver the Paris Agreement. And as I've just mentioned, the UK government will now host COP26 and in November and assume the presidency of the COP. The UK government has set out that they want to use the COP to drive forward global action towards net zero in line with the Paris Agreement. And in doing so, it is important that the UK ensures that it leads by example. In the build-up to COP26, I have participated in regular discussions with the COP26 President-elect, Alex Sharma, through a devolved administration interministerial working group to ensure that Northern Ireland both supports the UK government's ambitions for the event, but also plays a role at it. I'm delighted that the organisations and businesses from Northern Ireland have been successful in the expression of interest opportunity that was launched back in the spring, In particular, a number of our local councils will have the opportunity to showcase the positive work that they have been delivering in partnership with Climate NI, who you will hear from today, and the Northern Ireland Local Government Association in partnership with their mainland counterparts. I'm looking forward to Northern Ireland being able to showcase our position, our positive action on the world stage. We have some progress in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, with the latest Northern Ireland greenhouse gas emissions statistic published in June 2021 confirming a decrease of 18% in Northern Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions compared to the base year 1990. It's not enough. We must do more to reduce our emissions and to ensure that we deliver Northern Ireland's equitable contribution to the net zero target. We will require an all-sector approach across all of government, local government, private sector, communities, individuals working together to achieve the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions needed, whilst ensuring a just transition to a low-carbon economy society. To meet our commitments to reduce emissions and tackle climate and environmental challenges, my department has been leading on the development of a green growth strategy on behalf of the Northern Ireland Executive. I intend to publish a draft green growth strategy for consultation in November 2021 to align with COP26, with the final agreed strategy to be in place for March 2022. The strategy will be underpinned by climate change legislation, with delivery supported by a series of climate action plans. It's important that Northern Ireland Executive is seen to lead by example. Delivery of this strategy will be supported by a number of foundation programmes, including Forest for Futures, with others soon to follow, on food, peatlands and circular economy, strategies in future agricultural policy, a framework for which I published recently. The Green Growth Strategy is seeking to adopt a holistic approach to tackling the climate crisis in the right way by balancing climate action with the environment and the economy. An associated climate action plan will be developed in 2022, and this will set out in more detail the actions that will be taken to meet sector-specific greenhouse gas emissions. In order to provide a basis for sectoral emission targets, I have sought the advice of the Climate Change Committee, the independent statutory body which advises the UK and devolved governments on emissions targets. Inextricably linked to green growth is our commitment to the continued protection and improvement of the environment. Such work on future agriculture and agri-environment policy will be closely aligned with and informed by green growth and the environment strategies, as will other policy areas across government. And across Northern Ireland departments, strategy, policy and programme development to support green growth is already underway, from dealing with adaptation to climate change through flood management plans, the Living with Water programme, to mitigation strategies and the environment strategy. Examples of other works include promoting sustainable and active travel and digital transformation. All of these initiatives involving departments and their partner organisations have immense potential to transform Northern Ireland into a low-carbon economy. This will help Northern Ireland contribute to UK net zero carbon by 2050 target. And we know that even if with the most robust mitigation action to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we're already locked into a change in our climate. Catastrophic weather events such as the flooding in the northwest in 2017 and more recently the flooding caused by Storm Francis in parts of County Down have reinforced the need to prepare and adapt to climate change and extreme weather events. So my department published its second Northern Ireland Climate Change Adaptation Programme in September 2019. The programme is a cross-departmental response to the climate change risks facing Northern Ireland over the next 5 years and focuses on the key priority areas requiring adaptation action. Climate change is a dynamic process, however, and the risk it poses will change over time with a level of uncertainty around impacts. And in recognition of this, it's expected that we evolve the report and delivery actions in the programme on a yearly basis. And this will give government departments the opportunity to update, amend and add additional plans and actions to the programme. But we also understand that if we are to successfully adapt to a changing climate, it will require a collective effort from all parts of society. And that's why for the first time the adaptation programme includes a chapter written by Climate NI, which highlights the work that is going on outside of central government and civic society and local government sectors. And in terms of climate change adaptation action going forward, the next adaptation cycle within the UK has started with the publication of the UK Climate Change committee's independent assessment of the risk of climate change back in June this year. This comprehensive independent assessment is vitally important in the development of the third climate change risk assessment, which is due to be led in Parliament in early 2022, and which in turn will inform the mid-term review of the current Northern Ireland Climate Change Adaptation Programme and the development of the next adaptation programme once the current programme ends. My department also funds Climate NI to increase adaptation awareness and adaptation action outside of government, and has recently varied the contract to include mitigation support. Climate NI have worked in collaboration with Derry City and Strabane Council, where the council has developed its own adaptation plan and are currently assisting other council areas. I'm pleased to hear that all local councils in Northern Ireland have signed up to developing adaptation plans using the NI Adapts planning toolkit created by Climate NI. As Dear Minister, I want to ensure that we can all work together to achieve positive outcomes for nature and business, and to do this whilst addressing the significant challenges of climate change and the impacts on our natural environment. The findings of the recent IPCC report and the increasingly regular news reports of extreme and volatile weather events demonstrate the need to do a great deal more and at a pace to reduce our carbon emissions. There are many challenges, but I believe there are also many opportunities which we must grasp immediately to ensure that we deliver the correct balance between the climate, the environment and economic growth. I wish you well for the rest of your meeting today, and I look forward to working with our local government partners alongside the business, voluntary community and youth sectors to tackle the impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Poots, for your contribution. I think what's fairly evident to all of us, that if we're to effectively address the challenges ahead, it's going to require a whole of government and a whole of society focus and action. So thank you very much for your address and insights. We're going to move on with session one, and session one today is setting the strategic context and drivers. And I think at the end of the next two speakers, it should have helped us to understand why what we're doing is important and why the actions we all take over the next couple of years will matter so much. Our first speaker is Dr. Jade Bourbon, Manager Climate Northern Ireland. So just to give you a little insight into Jade's experience, Jade has over 10 years experience working in Northern Ireland, previously working at Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful and Ulster Wildlife, and in a voluntary capacity as an honorary lecturer in marine policy at Queen's University. Jade has worked all over the world, from New Zealand to Antarctica, Panama and Hawaii, above and below the sea as a marine biologist. Jade joined Climate Northern Ireland in March 2020, working on the Transboundary Adaptation Learning Exchange project as a resilience researcher. This project aims to establish an innovative learning network to enable a cohesive approach for measuring and acting on climate change adaptation across boundaries. And I think we all know that climate knows no boundaries. It also seeks to develop best practice for processes which empower national, sectoral and local decision makers. Jade continues in this role alongside being Acting Climate Northern Ireland Manager since February 2021. Jade is also involved in the development of the independent assessment of UK climate change risk and commissioning research into public perceptions of climate risk and resilience. So over to you, Jade.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm just going to move on now to my slides. Thank you. And thank you to Minister Poots as well for setting that context and making sure and demonstrating the department's commitment there to climate and the action that's needed. So today I'm going to talk to you about the strategic context and drivers for climate action in relation to Northern Ireland. First of all, as demonstrated there by Minister Poots, the climate is changing and it is an emergency. The globe is heating up and it's heating up rapidly. And this is leading to a cascade of effects, and extreme events are happening more frequently and they're more intense. In addition to this, if you take the COVID-19 crisis, there have been about 4.8 billion deaths. If you take the climate crisis, just from air pollution in relation to the fossil fuels, there has been roughly 10 billion deaths a year globally. So why is this happening? Well, humans are causing the climate crisis. Even the cautious scientists, including, myself, who tend to try and sort of edge the bets there and sort of say and don't want to be too loud and say anything that's out of place. But unequivocally, we are in a climate crisis and we need to do something about it. The good thing is, if humans are causing this climate crisis, we can take this opportunity and we have the power, if we want to seize it and act now, to actually do something about it. The climate crisis is not just happening some far off place and in lands far from here. It is happening here and it is happening now. Since the mid-1970s, the temperature has risen about sort of 0.7 degrees, and we're now heading towards this 1.2/2.1 by the 2080s. What does that mean? That doesn't sound like very much. Well, that's just the average. The thing that we need to be careful of are those extremes, because we here as well, just this summer, we had the highest temperature on record. So in some ways, we think 31 degrees, great, no need for a summer holiday, we can have it here. But once we start having to do that, and we start having to work in those conditions when our buildings are not set up for it, we start trying to sleep in our houses when our houses are overheating, that productivity gets cut, and there are people dying from the heat. It is predicted that by the sort of 2100s, the number of people dying from heat in Northern Ireland are likely to double. So we need to start taking it seriously. Heat is not just one of those things that is nice, it also has impacts. In relation to this, flooding is perhaps one of those more well-known things, and the shifts that we're likely to have in terms of rainfall, it's likely to increase in winter and decrease in summer. So you may think, okay, we're supposed to have these hot, dry summers, but when that rain comes, it's going to come like a monsoon, as we've seen from the flooding, and we need to make sure we've got systems in place to move that water to the right place where it's needed and collect it at the right time, so that we're not having the costs and the impacts of flooding happening right the way across Northern Ireland and beyond. In terms of sea level rise, we need to have sea level planning in place. We need to think about this because it is happening now, and when we look at that, we need to decide what areas are we going to protect and where are we going to let the sea come in, because we do have to make those decisions and we have to make them right across our boundaries and start leading on that as well. In terms of the UK climate change risk assessment, I'm glad Minister Poots mentioned that, because this here provides for you more information on what all of that sort of changes in the extreme weather and the changes in the climate actually mean on the ground. So there is a whole range of sectoral briefings there which cover everything from sort of the basics for children and young people, right to heating, to our telecoms, ICT, to wildfire, to our water systems and our health and social care. Climate change is not just an environmental problem. It is a health problem, it is an economy problem, it is a business problem, it is an everything problem. We need to make it an everything solution as well. So this report was pulled together by over 450 experts and 130 organisations. The technical report is long, but there are references there for you to find there. In terms of where I recommend you start, go look at those sectoral briefings. They're relevant to everybody that is listening on this call. And there's also a summary for Northern Ireland, which then goes into a little bit more depth in terms of the evidence that we have for here. And then there is also the advice report, which I'll come on to in a minute. In terms of this risk assessment, there were 61 risks and opportunities identified from climate change across the UK and also for Northern Ireland. Of these, 31 of those risks require urgent action. And by urgent, we mean now, as in this year or next year. There are 19 risks that need further investigation. There is less evidence for Northern Ireland than for any of the other regions of the UK. So it's important that we commission that evidence, fill those data gaps, and start taking that action to make sure that we're saving ourselves costs in the long run. These risks are not just across the natural environment, they're also across business, industry, infrastructure, international dimensions, because what's happening elsewhere is going to have knock-on effects for us here, and also for health, communities, and the built environment. And I think we're just starting to realise the environmental side, we need to start kicking it in across all of the areas that we're working in. So how does that feed into our decision-making and policies here? Well, we have the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment that happens every 5 years, and that happens in sort of conjunction with the Northern Ireland National Adaptation Programme. And within that, there's also a chapter for civil society and local government. And this is where you fit in here, because you've promised through SOLAS to produce an adaptation working group by 2021. So for those councils who've not done it yet, you've got a couple more months before Christmas to try and get that in. It doesn't take too much. You just need to pull together people across all your departments to start taking climate change seriously and have a meeting and get them together. That's step one. Know who you need to help solve this problem. By 2024, you've also promised to develop a full adaptation plan. There are councils who've already started to do that. There are some who are published. Learn from what's there, learn from everyone else's experience and piggyback on that and share that knowledge so that we can all do this as quickly as possible. There are 4 councils who have declared a climate change emergency as well. So they will be hopefully shifting into taking more action. This all will feed back into how we assess that risk. So the actions that you're planning to take will hopefully reduce climate risk in the future. So I wanted to include a couple of notes just in terms of how to do that planning. And this sort of advice comes from the Climate Change Committee. So they've given these 10 principles for effective adaptation. I'm not going to go through them now because they've only got 10 minutes and I could spend an hour on this on alone. But just to start thinking that we need to start planning, not just for the 2-degree warm, but also assess for 4 degrees as well, because globally we're on sort of target at the moment for 2.7 degrees warming, and that's with all the plans and all the policies in place that we have. So there's still a gap in terms of managing that climate risk. We need a vision, we need funding, we need to work cooperatively, we need to understand those tipping points and start planning and assess what might be happening. And we need to take inequality into account as well. So we might start to realise that those areas where the people live who are most socially deprived are also most likely to suffer from these climate change risks as well. This is not just something that you should do for the good of your hearts. It's not something you should just do because, it's the right thing to do and it'll make the environment better. It will also save you money. And this has been assessed through sort of the benefit-cost ratios of adaptation, which is within that advice report I was talking about for CCC. And we'd love to get these sort of measures done a little bit better for Northern Ireland so we can really sort of predict how much it's likely to be. But water efficiency, it's more than a 10-to-1 benefit ratio. In terms of heat alert and heat wave planning, this is something which councils should be doing as well. So kind of in a nutshell, in terms of all of that advice, you need to start planning, but you need to not just think about that mean, that 1.2 degrees. You really need to start thinking, okay, how are we going to cope with those extremes? How are we going to cope with those, one-off events becoming more frequent? And you can do it. I know you can, because you have the power and you have the influence, not just on your own remit, but you have the influence in terms of the businesses that you fund, you have the remit in terms of the planning decisions you approve or don't approve or change, and also in your procurement decisions, and all of the other areas that go beyond just your direct remit. So if we've managed to cut down this risk and you're all going to produce these amazing adaptation plans, we also need to contribute towards cutting those greenhouse gases. That's the mitigation side. So the UK target for greenhouse gases is to cut by 78% by 2035. So that's the net zero by 2050. Net zero doesn't mean zero altogether. It means that we're trying to get them down as much as possible. And then we need to make sure that we are counterbalancing that with, capturing it through nature-based solutions or carbon capture. Northern Ireland, as the Minister did say, is not doing the best at this. We are way behind the other parts of the UK at the moment. In terms of our per capita emissions, we often compare, we say, oh, what about China? China is actually about 10.1 tonnes per capita per person emissions yearly. And this is from 2019, so before the COVID crisis. While Northern Ireland in the same time period was 11.1. So we're actually worse than China at the moment. In terms of the UK, and this includes that Northern Ireland figure, it's about 6.8, and for the Republic of Ireland, that is about 7.5. But we can all do better. So in terms of the sectors and how it's measured, those numbers that are red, they need to shift. Those numbers that are green, they need to shift more. So we really need to start taking it seriously and just cutting as much as we can across all. Because at the moment, there was only a 1% shift in our emissions from 2018 to 2019, and that's simply not enough. The more we cut right now, the more choices we have later. At the moment, we have a bit of a ski slope graph going on. We need to start cutting that urgently, which will then mean that later on we can think, okay, what are the things that we can actually keep going with later? In terms of legislation, there are international and national policies and targets in place, and I know that Barry is going to speak a little bit about some of those international and sides of things as well. But at the moment, that climate change bill, there are 2 in progress in Northern Ireland. Both of them have really good points, and both of them have areas which could strengthen, but we simply can't wait for them to come in. So this is why I'm asking you to start acting now rather than waiting for those to come, because this will benefit you in the future. And I know there are councils already leading the way in this. So I've just put this in, which you've probably seen because it's not a new cartoon, but there are plenty of co-benefits of doing this as well. It's not just about carbon. Carbon is a small element, you know, in a big cycle with many other things going on. Who does not want clean water? Who does not want livable cities? Who does not want to save money because their energy is a little bit more, you know, efficient so they don't have to use as much, so they cut their bills? This is things that we all want, and it's just taking that big step and brave step to make systemic change. So I know this is a very tiny slide. I've included it so you can go back and read it later, but basically the Climate Change Commission have given advice to the Northern Ireland Executive of actions which need to take place by the end of 2022. So this is, you know, urgent things that need to happen, and many of these things are also relevant to you as councils. I've also popped here, you know, a guide to how you can make sure that your adaptation plan, when you're developing it, includes scenarios, it plans for 4 degrees as opposed to just 2, and really take into account how you cut that climate risk so that you've got a better, more climate resilient, climate-proof future. And then I've also provided a few more links here so that you can go through these and have a look at some of the relevant bits and find them, okay? So thank you for having me, thank you for letting me talk, and I hope to speak to some of you soon to see how we can help you to make this a better climate-proof future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. And I think a fairly insightful input, and leaves us under no illusion that we do need to act, and we all need to act now. I'm going to move along to our next speaker, who is Dr. Barry O'Dwyer, Lead Research Scientist, Impacts and Adaptation Group, University College Cork. Dr. O'Dwyer is a research fellow with the SFI Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine in UCC. In this role, Barry leads the development of the EPA-funded Climate Ireland programme, which works directly with local and sectoral decision makers to advance the development and implementation of adaptation action. Barry also leads the Climate Impacts and Adaptation Group, and through a wide range of nationally and internationally funded research projects, aims to develop decision-relevant climate and adaptation information. So over to Barry for an input.
So good morning, everybody. My name's Barry O'Dwyer, and I work at the Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine at University College Cork. In my role in UCC, I lead the development of the EPA-funded Climate Ireland programme, and I also lead the Impacts and Adaptation Group at MARI. Today, I've been asked to give an overview of the strategic context and drivers for local government and climate action. And essentially, the strategic context and drivers come down to 2 things: the evolving international and national science, and also the evolving international and national policy. In terms of the science, since 1957, the science of climate change has developed significantly when US oceanographers first warned of climate warming. We had the establishment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 1988, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the leading international body on climate change itself. Every 5 years, they produce reports that synthesize and assess available evidence on observed and projected climate change on a global basis. So since 1988, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has produced 5 assessments reports with a current report in production. All of these reports paint the same picture. Global temperatures are increasing. These increases are expected to continue and intensify into the future. And if we take the most recent report released in 2021, the first part of the 6th assessment reports of the IPCC, It looks at the scale of recent changes across the climate system as a whole are unprecedented. Human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes across every region. And it's expected that global surface temperatures will continue to increase and at least mid-century under all the different emission scenarios considered. So the global goals of 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees will likely be exceeded in the 21st century unless we have really significant reductions in rates of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions. So to paint that picture again, what we have here are two graphs from the recent IPCC AR6 report. On the left is projected temperature change at the end of the century. SSP refers to the various scenarios that are used. So SSP 1.9 scenario refers to a world where we go green and start to reduce emissions by 2030. What we still see is an increase in overall global temperatures, and similarly under 8.5, which is a fossil fuel dependent scenario, we see increases by end of century of up to 5 degrees Celsius. And this is also reflected in projected changes in sea level rise, where we're looking at up to just over a half metre under an optimistic scenario, while up to 1 metre by end of century under a more pessimistic fossil fueled scenario itself. So that's the global science around climate change. It's settled in terms of the anthropogenic influence on our climate system. In Ireland, we've also been looking at the science of climate change and what it means for Ireland right back from 1988 and the studies of the implications of climate change for Ireland by Brendan McWilliams. And most recently, we've had a report produced by Paul Nolan and James Flanagan at the Irish Centre for High-End Computing, looking at what does Ireland's climate look like by mid-century. This report shows that average temperatures are expected to rise across all seasons with the occurrence of heat waves. We expect to see continued increases in sea level. We expect to see significant reductions in overall levels of precipitation, particularly in summer and autumn, increase in the frequency of intense precipitation events, and also an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. So what does this all mean? Well, it means we're likely to see more flooding. We're going to see more incidences of issues around water availability, which will exacerbate our existing water supply issues. We expect to see continued sea level rise, resulting in coastal inundation and erosion. Increase in temperatures, changing patterns of precipitation will put further pressure on ecosystems and biodiversity. We expect to see increase in the occurrence of heat waves affecting vulnerable populations, and also an increase in the frequency of weather extremes, such as windstorms leading to infrastructure damage, amongst others. So essentially, many of the issues we currently face will be exacerbated by our changing climate. And a very good example of this comes from my own area here in Cork City, where we start to think about sea level rise and coastal inundation. The photo on the top left shows Cork City on a spring tide in current conditions, and you can see there isn't particularly much leeway between the quay walls and the river itself. So when we start to think about what does a sea level rise mean for Cork City, and when we look at a 1 metre sea level rise under an 8.5 or a high emissions scenario, the map on the right-hand side shows the areas that we can expect to see inundated when we start to see these sea level rise, combined with a 1 in 200 year and a 1 in 1,000 year storm event. And we have to understand that increasing sea level will increase the base on which storms affect our coastal areas. And as you can see from this, it's a particular problem for Cork City, and one that we have to start to be thinking about proactively now. In addition to exacerbating existing risks, we also expect climate change to result in new risks, and we can think about that in the context of projected changes in the occurrence of heat waves. Changes in the hazard, as we would say, is one aspect, but we also have to look at how changes in our own vulnerability might occur to these risks themselves. And what we have in the bottom left is two population pyramids, which looks at Ireland's population in terms of age, both now and by mid-century. And what we can see there is Ireland is an ageing population that will become more vulnerable to heat risk itself. Heat risk is exacerbated by urban areas through the urban heat island effect, and we can see this on the right-hand side, where we look at two scenarios of projected change in temperature and also heat risk for Dublin City. The top, it would be a mid-emission scenario, while the bottom maps are of a high emission scenario. And we can see that areas of Dublin city centre will be at significant risks from heatwave impacts, and particularly for vulnerable populations. So in tandem with the development of the science of climate change, we've also had a policy response starting right back in 1979 with the world's first climate change conference. And this has led through a number of key pieces of policy, such as the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, and then most recently through the Paris Agreement in 2015. Key aspect of the Paris Agreement in 2015 was that it recognised that significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are required to decrease the causes of climate change, while we also need to consider the inevitable impacts that we are going to face from climate change as a result of our long history of greenhouse gas emissions. And that policy response is adaptation, where we adapt to our current and weather conditions and plan for future climate impacts themselves. In addition to evolving international policy, we've also seen an evolution in our own policy here in Ireland, and this is particularly evident through the recent publication of the 2021 Climate Action Low Carbon Development Act. And this puts a particular focus on local authorities who are seen to be at the forefront of both addressing the causes of climate change through emissions reductions, but also through adaptation to climate change impacts. The 2021 Climate and Low Carbon Development Act contains two key pieces. It provides for the development of local authority climate action plans, which outlines how the local authority will respond to the challenge of climate change within their own organisation, but also within the area under their jurisdiction. And it provides the local authorities shall, when making development plans, account for their climate action plans, and for that purposes amend the Planning and Development Act 2000. So it puts climate at the centre of all aspects of planning. So just to conclude, on the basis of this very strong policy framework that puts local authorities at the centre of the delivery of climate action, we have to see that proactive and coordinated climate action is required across all scales of government and across borders to address the challenge of climate change. The Climate Acts 2015 to 2021 provide an essential framework to advance planning for climate mitigation and adaptation, and local authorities are at the coalface in delivering this action. And they've demonstrated their commitment through the signing of the local Climate Action Charter and the Local Authority Climate Action Strategy. Through the development of local authority climate action plans, as required by the recent 2021 Climate Act, local government will seek to implement climate action through their own services and functions, and to work collaboratively with all levels of government and communities to coordinate and influence climate action in their local area. So on that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and my contact details are here, and I hope you have a very useful and informative day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade and Barry, for two excellent presentations. I think you'll agree that in the space of 20 minutes, we've been left under no illusion that we really do need to act. I want to share a little quote I came across recently at a leadership course. And it was, if the why is big enough, the how will be figured out. So I think after session one, we're in no doubt that the why is big enough. And we're going to move on now to session two, where Stephen and Paddy will talk about the how a little bit and the structures that are being put in place across local government to bring about change and the impact that local government is having at the moment. So we're going to move into session two, and I want to welcome Stephen Reid. Stephen is Chief Executive of Ards and North Down Borough Council. Stephen, like myself, has over 35 years in local government, working in various roles: Belfast City Council, Antrim Borough Council, Ards Borough Council and North Down Borough Council, prior to being appointed Chief Executive in 2011. Stephen followed the reorganisation of local government, was appointed in 2014 as Chief Executive of the newly formed Ards and North Down Borough Council, initially in its shadow form and then taken full responsibility in the role in 2015. Stephen is currently Chair of the Local Government Chief Executives Group Solace and is Chair of Local Government Training Group since 2015 and has co-chaired the Northern Ireland Emergency Planning Group, and I'm sure the last year and a half has certainly seen a busy stint in that. Stephen will talk on the structures and the forum in Northern Ireland working in the area of climate change and how that is having an impact. So thank you, Stephen.
So thank you, Colette, for that introduction, and good morning, everybody here in Kilkenny Castle and also very far away as well. And great to see so many people engaged and involved today. And as you said, Colette, a very exciting opportunity to get together and discuss these very important issues. So thank you, Colette. As you said, I'm pleased to be making this presentation this morning to set out and explore the structures of supporting climate action in Northern Ireland, and in particular those affecting local government. Hopefully this builds upon the earlier presentation from Dr. Jade Berman of Climate Northern Ireland, and we can start to see the action that we need to start to take. You'll see from the map on the slide that there are a number of existing climate action structures and networks operating in Northern Ireland. Many include a multi-agency approach, and while others are focused solely on local councils, I will now review each of them and explore how they facilitate climate action across Northern Ireland and beyond. Climate Northern Ireland, or Climate NI as they're known, is the largest network organisation for climate action in Northern Ireland. Funded by the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, DAERA, the team lead on multi-sectoral collaboration across both mitigation and adaptation. Local councils feature strongly in the work of Climate NI, with partnership projects facilitating deeper collaboration to leading to wider cross-council networks such as the Local Government Climate Action Network. Key areas for Climate NI's work includes the training and facilitation and supporting of policy and research development. In particular, they lead on the preparation of the local government chapter in the Northern Ireland Climate Change Adaptation Programme, which includes a summary of council adaptation, planning and action, and Jade referred to that earlier. Climate NI also facilitate collaboration and partnerships with local authorities, both within Northern Ireland and beyond. Through digital and social media channels, Climate NI regularly share information including new and emerging research, climate data, best practice case studies and funding opportunities. They also host numerous climate action events, and as you heard, are leading a session at COP26 in Glasgow to showcase our local authority climate adaptation, along with partners in Northern Ireland Local Government Association, Derry City and Strabane District Council, and Belfast City Council. Climate NI also partnered with Derry City and Strabane District Council in the EU-funded Climate Project, which saw the development of the first local authority climate adaptation in Northern Ireland. For Northern Ireland local authorities, the Climate NI-led Local Government Climate Action Network is one of the most useful networks, as it provides council officers with a forum to share learning and best practice and support for each other on their own climate action journeys. The forum meets every quarter and with regular email updates and support from Climate NI team to council officers. Climate NI also support the local authorities through the Northern Ireland Adapts platform, providing a suite of resources to aid councils in their climate adaptation planning journeys. Resources range from climate data and risk summaries to more bespoke climate action fact sheets, all targeting at local authority service areas. These have proved very useful in engaging council departments with the issue of climate change and have helped embed climate actions across all councils. Focusing on adaptation, the Regional Community Resilience Group is led by the Department for Infrastructure and provides a forum to coordinate community resilience planning and action. Attended by local council emergency planning and resilience officers, this group is instrumental in bringing together the necessary agencies to prepare for climate change impacts such as severe weather events. Through regular email updates and quarterly e-zines, members are also kept up to date with the research that's emerging, plans, best practice, and in funding for resilience projects. Sustainable NI was formed in 1998, and it's a collaborative project from the Northern Ireland Environment Link, WWF, and the local government training group. The objective then, as is still the case now, is to promote the adoption of sustainable development principles in local authorities and other agencies of government. Working across all councils, it has led to many successful initiatives, including the establishment of Local Government Sustainable Development Forum, which Sustainable NI continue to facilitate and to manage. In addition, Sustainable NI also provide direct support to councils, offering bespoke solutions and policy guidance where necessary. All 11 councils are now well established since 2015, and Sustainable NI continues to cultivate new opportunities to embed sustainability into them all. This looks at land use planning and community planning, for example, to support councils and communities in the creation of a sustainable future. In 2018-19, Sustainable NI took a review of its corporate strategy and has now published a 5-year plan, Time for Change. This strategy highlights the crucial role that they will play in informing and coordinating sustainable activities of local authorities and public sector bodies. By way of a good example, looking at Northern Ireland's largest local authority in Belfast City Council, this slide shows how a number of networks exist across the City Council area, including the Council's membership of the Global Resilient Cities Network. This has resulted in the city's first resilience strategy and climate action plan, and that is being delivered through a resilience and sustainability board. Led by Belfast City Council, this board has representation from multi-agencies and stakeholders and has particular responsibility for climate action, climate resilience, and a sustainable development for the city. Critically, that board will support the embedding and delivery of sustainable development objectives and resilience across the city. Their community planning priorities, or the Belfast Agenda, is critical as well to link across all boards as appropriate and to make sure that this progress is embedded within the community planning partnership across the city. The Belfast Climate Commission is co-chaired by Queen's University and Belfast City Council. The Commission works alongside existing structures and programmes in the city, such as the Resilience and Sustainability Board. Established in 2019, the Commission is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council for Place-Based Climate Action Network, and it's modelled on 2 similar commissions in Leeds and Edinburgh. It is the first of its kind in Northern Ireland and provides a collaborative network for climate action across Belfast. Public, private and third sector members collaborate in 4 core working areas: business and finance, just transition, community climate action and youth. And this complements and supports the work of the City Council's Resilience and Sustainability Board. Again, as by way of an example, I'm pleased to learn that there's been a significant number of cross-border collaboration on the climate action agenda. Local councils in the Northwest, as we heard from the Minister, are now working on a cross-border basis to tackle the climate emergency. Existing structures such as the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership and Northwest Regional Development Fund have provided the necessary funding and support to begin cross-border climate action planning in earnest. The partnerships provide a mechanism to bring forward to the necessary council officers and agencies and research organisations to work collaboratively on climate action in the Northwest. This has resulted in a number of climate initiatives in the region. Building upon the Northwest structures a cross-border green transformation and climate action group comprised of officers from Donegal County Council and Derry City and Strabane District Council regularly meet to collaborate on delivery of cross-border climate action initiatives. Key areas such as waste and energy, biodiversity, economic development and regeneration, as well as planning, heritage and green infrastructure, are all represented on this important group. Further work facilitated by the North West Regional Development Group, Donegal County Council and Derry City and Strabane District Council have collaborated on the development of a North West regional energy strategy, providing a pathway to net zero by 2045. This North West partnership has also supported the development of the emerging North West Climate Action Plan, the first cross-border climate action plan on the island. The Climate Action Framework and Plan seek to deliver cross-border, multi-sectoral plan, delivering adaptation and mitigation across the Northwest. A core focus of the framework is the potential for nature-based solutions to address the climate emergency alongside the core values of climate justice, capacity building and partnership working. Work is currently ongoing to define the necessary governance structures and mechanisms required to deliver the aims of the North West Climate Action Framework and actions in the emerging plan. The draft framework is due for completion in December of this year. Recognising the need to tackle the climate emergency and ensuring that we tackle these issues within the emerging plan are significantly important. We also need to focus on ensuring that a post-COVID-19 green transformation is baked into these plans. The North West Strategic Growth Partnership members also have recently collaborated on the North West Green Transformation Statement and presented to government and departments north and south. So great to see the North West leading the way in cross-border collaborative working on climate, and this work hopefully will inspire others to go the same way. So, in thinking about how to continue this collective climate action work across Northern Ireland, which has begun, it's critical that we build upon the existing structures and networks, aligning them to emerging national legislation and strategies. There's plenty more work to be done, as we've heard this morning. However, we're already starting to see the benefits of this strong collaboration throughout Northern Ireland, including the ability to maximise opportunities for innovation and funding, avoid the duplication of effort, and create a wider ownership and stakeholder buy-in for action. So continued collaboration and seeking further opportunities to work together can only help us tackle this climate crisis more effectively. Hopefully now we can all see more clearly how the opportunities for further collaboration must be developed within both Northern Ireland and on a cross-border basis. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen, for that insight. And going to move on to our next speaker and welcome Paddy Mann. Paddy is my opposite number in Longford County Council. Paddy is from Tuam in County Galway, and his background is engineering, graduating from UCG in 1984 with a Bachelor of Engineering, and Paddy also holds a Master's in Business Administration from DCU. Paddy has worked in London and Sydney in construction in the 1980s, returning to Ireland to join Mayo County Council in 1991 and progressing to the position of Director of Services. Paddy was appointed as Chief Executive of Longford County Council in July 2016. Paddy is currently the Chair of the CCMA Climate Action, Transport and Networks Committee. And Paddy will talk about, I suppose, the structure that local government in the south have put in place, which is the CARO structure, its work programme and how it's starting to deliver. So you're very welcome, Paddy.
Thanks very much, Colette, and good morning, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here in Kilkenny at this very important conference. What I'd like to do today really is to just outline the structures that are here in the Republic in the area of climate action in local government. The key supports, I suppose, that were needed to be put in place, how we understood really where all of the 31 local authorities were at a certain point in time, and then how we looked at developing a strategy for the future in the area of climate change, and then how about we went about mobilising our sector so that we can move forward as one. So, as Colette said, I'm chair of the CCMA's Climate Action, Transport and Networks Committee, very, very busy committee, which kind of advises, on high-level policy direction for the sector and oversees the activities really on behalf of the sector. And just over the last number of years, between 18 and 21, we've seen the establishment of the Climate Action Regional Offices, the development of climate change adaptation strategies across all 31 local authorities, the signing of the Climate Action Charter by every local authority just over 2 years ago, the development of a very, very active local authority climate action training strategy and programme, the publication of a document on the profile of local government climate actions over the last 10 years, our strategy that was mentioned in an earlier presentation, and indeed the funding submission that accompanied that strategy. And I suppose I'd like to touch at the end of the presentation then on where we are in terms of implementing the strategy as we progress through 20 and 21. So, firstly, the Climate Action Regional Offices, there are 4 of them. They've become known as the CAROs. So there's a CARO in Dublin City, which covers the 4 Dublin local authorities. There's shared services on behalf of the sector. There's 5-year funding provided by the Department of Climate, but it's a collaboration between ourselves and the sector and the department. And their purpose is to build on the expertise and experience that is in the sector and to translate that expertise throughout all local authorities. As I said, we have a CARO in Dublin City covering the 4 Dublin local authorities. The Kilkenny and Kildare CAROs cover the Midlands and East of the country. The CARO in Mayo covers the Atlantic Seaboard North, which is Donegal, Mayo, Sligo and Galway. And the CARO in Cork covers Atlantic Seaboard South, Clare, Limerick, Cork and Kerry. So the Climate Action Regional Offices coordinate engagement across the various agencies and translate national sectoral level efforts to local level. The oversight is by the Local Authority Climate Action Steering Group, chaired by Danny McLaughlin, Chief Executive of South Dublin County Council, and that in turn kind of reports into our committee. So there's a very good governance in place. The CARO programme work, as Colette mentioned, management and governance, adaptation has been mentioned a lot here this morning, adaptation advice, I suppose, and guidance for all of the local authorities across the sector, beginning to provide support and guidance in the area of mitigation, communications and citizens engagement, communications within the sector, but also looking outwards to communicate with our communities and our business communities, etc., throughout the country, training and education, and the whole area of knowledge and learning and development of knowledge. So the CAROs have been absolutely a fantastic resource, I suppose. They're put in place for a 5-year period. We're at the end of year 3 at this stage, so that they have had a significant impact on translating what's required from the climate action sort of agenda to individual local authorities. The key sort of action that had to be carried out, I suppose, by local authorities following the establishment of the CAROs was the development of climate change adaptation strategies. A requirement from the 2015 Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act, based on, I suppose, the national adaptation framework, and each sector required to prepare their adaptation strategy. But in September 2019, all 31 local authorities adopted their adaptation strategy, which included an aggregate of almost 2,500 actions across the sector, with a requirement to report annually to the department. So we're measured, and we do get a scorecard, and the scorecard for this year, which has been prepared by the Climate Change Advisory Council, says that the sector is making moderate progress in the area of adaptation. Moderate is, it's not great, it's not bad. I suppose one of the key issues really is that it's been recognised that, we do need more resources in the area of local government to really progress and perform in this space, and I think that's been acknowledged and will hopefully be acknowledged when the Advisory Council submits its report to the Minister, I think later this month or in November. I'll move forward really to the next area of sort of, I suppose, commitment by the local authority sector also 2 years ago. Following the publication of the Government's Climate Action Plan of 2019, all 31 local authorities signed the Climate Charter, which was mentioned in an earlier presentation as well, committing really to our ambition and our leadership in this space to provide robust leadership in advancing a climate resilient, vibrant and sustainable country, but also committing to 22 actions in various areas like planning, procurement, community engagement, etc. So it really was a statement of intent that the sector has done a lot, but is prepared to do much more in this area and needs to show the leadership in that space. In the area of training, I suppose this is a very key area at the moment. Action 150 in the 2019 Climate Action Plan requires the local authority sector to support the development of climate action leadership and capacities. So a climate action training programme was prepared, approved by the CCMA, endorsed by the Association of Irish Local Government, supported and funded, most importantly, by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. And it is in the process of being delivered, coordinated by our local authority National Services Training Group. And the target is that every one of our 29,000 local authority staff across the length and breadth of the country will receive some degree of training either in 21 or in 22, and of course our 949 elected members. There are 6 training pillars that are identified. I'll run through them briefly if that's okay. Championing leadership is aimed at senior management teams and our elected members, and to date 17 of our 31 local authorities have completed this course, about 650 participants. In terms of raising awareness, this is targeted at our key sort of mid-management grades across all local authorities. And the training here is to raise awareness amongst our staff in the area of climate action and also at local and community levels. And that programme is ongoing. We've had 6,500 people so far this year, with another 3,000 enrolled and expected to be trained, I'd say, in the next 5 to 6 months. In the area of building capacities, this is targeted at our climate action teams, and some local authorities have teams formed and in place, others don't, and it's a resource issue. But this training is in progress, and so far this year we've trained over 100 people, and there's further courses to be carried out in the months ahead. The empowering change is really, I suppose, a key one for empowering change across communities and across enterprises, across businesses throughout the country. That training programme is at a development stage with a pilot to be delivered in 21, and it's really aimed at climate change in the community and how we as local authorities can provide the leadership that's required there. So we should see that training being rolled out in 22. Mobilising local authority staff to implement practical outdoor climate action measures under the pillar of delivering action is a trainer recruitment stage, aimed at a lot of our outdoor teams and people, our crew that our engineers that kind of deal with our outdoor teams, and we should be carrying out that training next year. And the final pillar is actioning policy. So there's a range of courses here really targeted really at our planners, at our procurement teams in the area of green procurement, our flood risk people where flood risk is an issue, and it is an issue in a lot of our counties. And that's the other sort of key pillar. There's a number of other sort of courses, I suppose, under these pillars that are a conceptual stage, and I think training is going to be an ongoing issue. Once we have the training done for all of our 29,000 staff, it's inevitable that further training and development will be required in that area. But I suppose we've made a significant start, and it's important to recognise that. What we did in 2020, just to reflect on what the sector has been doing in this area, because it didn't just start out of nothing. We've been aware that climate change has been an issue and has been recognised at this event already this morning. And our committee commissioned the LGMA to carry out a profile of climate actions across local government over a period from around 2011 to 2019. And we published that research in early 2020. And it really is an inventory of actions that were carried out by every single local authority in the Republic. It's an excellent document. I'm not going to go into the details. It's available online on our LGMA website, but it just profiles, even case studies from every single county and city council, shared learnings, and I suppose evidence that the sector has been very, very active in this space. And it's a very, very important baseline, really. In 2020, with the establishment of a new government, a significant green agenda, the new Climate Action Bill just enacted there during the summer. But it's a great baseline, really, for the sector to move forward. And with that in mind, the sector then worked on developing our strategy, which was mentioned earlier by Barry. And our strategy was produced last year and adopted by the sector around this time last year, with a vision to leverage the capability, reach and resources of local authorities to effectively lead and coordinate climate action across Ireland, with a mission to deliver transformative change across our cities and counties through leadership, example, and mobilising action at local level, mobilising our own teams and then mobilising action at local level. So that's our ambition. It's a significant one. It's been mentioned by Barry earlier, but I think it's very important that we have that strategy. Accompanying that strategy were a set of 6 high-level objectives to foster governance and leadership, to achieve our targets in the areas of carbon emission and energy efficiency, to deliver on our climate adaptation plans mentioned earlier, to mobilise communities, mobilise local enterprise, and achieve the just transition that was mentioned earlier as well. That also identified significant resource requirement that each local authority needs to put in place. Some already have some resources in place, but we believe that there should be a consistent level of resources across all local authorities. And we prepared this sort of document along with our strategy last year and made submissions to different government departments outlining the need for resources to be provided for climate action officers, climate action coordinators, energy efficiency officers, green solution specialists, and climate action community officers. So, you know, we've had some degree of engagement with different government departments, some successes, some still working on, but by and large, I think there's a growing acceptance that local authorities need to be resourced properly to realise our ambition, and it's something that is a continued sort of there's continued expectation, I suppose, across the sector that resources need to be put in place for us to, you know, to perform at our best in this space. So I suppose up to now, you know, a lot of what I've been talking about really is reflecting on strategies, reflecting on training plans, reflecting on adaptation plans, etc. What are we doing at the moment? As I said, in training, about 10,000 of our staff and elected members have been trained already. In the areas of adaptation, our committee working with the Carrows are developing guidance on adaptation on our local and regional roads, and also in the area of coastal erosion. In the area of mitigation, we're supporting and working on regional and local energy projects, and our national public lighting programme is well advanced. And the first contract for the southern region is either signed or is due to be signed at the moment, and that's going to make a significant impact on, I suppose, an improved quality of life, better quality light, safer roads, but also more efficient in terms of the economic impact, but also more efficient in terms of emissions reduction and energy efficiency. So it's a very significant, I suppose, intervention by our sector, where every public light in the country will be upgraded and retrofitted to an energy efficiency bulb. If it's not been done now, it'll be done either, you know, in the 3 main contracts that are going to be rolled out between now and next year. We're working with our communities on sustainable energy communities, and we have a very interesting and significant partnership with the GAA and the Green Clubs programme, which we think will help drive the climate change agenda right through every community in the country. Next week, the CCMA is hosting a conference on the economic opportunities through climate change. That's a conference, I think, over 2 days next week. We're looking at research into the effect of climate change on fluvial flooding. We've prepared a very important document for our sector in the area of EV charging points for local authorities. And we're also looking at reimagining our fleet, which was originally called decarbonising the fleet. But I think reimagining is a bit more positive and kind of outlines the innovation that's required so that we can, you know, kind of follow the lead of the local authorities and have fleets that are fit for purpose but are not carbon consumers in the years ahead. Every local authority has identified a decarbonising zone in partnership with the Department of Housing. We have significant works going on in the area of active travel and also in retrofitting our social housing. So listen, it's a very busy space at the moment, but it's important to reflect that a lot is happening in this in the area. So what's next for local government? As I said earlier, the Climate Amendment Act was passed into law earlier this year, and it establishes, you know, the major sort of ambition on behalf of the state in this space. And as was mentioned earlier, local authorities must now prepare climate action plans at least every 5 years and have cognizance of the concept of carbon budgets, which will be based on 5 years as well. As well as that, the climate action plan, a follow-on from the bill, expected to be finalised and published in the coming weeks. It was informed by a very, very important national dialogue for climate action, which was carried out during the lockdown earlier this year. And it actually was facilitated, primarily through the local authorities sort of governed PPNs, the public participation networks, and indeed the Corlin and Oaks, which is, are again overseen by the local authorities across the country. And it produced very important and significant feedback that informed the bill and indeed will inform the climate action plan. And I suppose, it just kind of emphasises the role that local authorities do play in delivering national policies locally, but also in feeding back local issues back to the national to inform very, very important areas like climate change. What's next for us is we expect to continue supporting and delivering local level climate action projects, mitigation and adaptation, supporting our businesses and communities in the years ahead, and realising our vision, which, as I said earlier, is to leverage our capacity, our reach and our resources to effectively lead and coordinate climate change across Ireland. That's the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank everybody very much.
Thanks, Stephen and Paddy, and I'm very conscious I'm coming between people's caffeine boosts, so I'm going to conclude fairly quickly, but I think what's fairly obvious from the last two presentations is that local government is the arm of government closest to the people, closest to communities, and if we're resourced properly, we're certainly up to the challenge of leading through the difficult times ahead, and I think we're ready to take action. We've started the process, and I think with adequate resources we can certainly do a lot at community level on the ground, and local government certainly want to be in that space and are very much putting their hands up to say we will lead in that space if we're resourced properly. So just to conclude this session, to thank our four speakers this morning, Jade, Barry, Stephen and Paddy. We're heading into the coffee break. There will be a questions and answers after the third session, so keep the questions coming in. And I think we're to be back at 11 o'clock. I know you're in a little bit late, but if people can grab the coffee, and if you're sitting back at your desk, you might see a little bit of Kilkenny and the regeneration of what was a former Smithwick site in Kilkenny, in the very heart of Kilkenny, which is very much city centre first and sustainable development. So thank you very much, and I'll be handing over after the tea break to John Kelpie.
Kilkenny is the place where business succeeds. Its perfect central location with a wide catchment area has a proven capacity to attract high-calibre talent. Kilkenny is a vibrant place to live and to work, steeped in history and in rich culture. It is a place where people can come not only to make a living, but to make a life. The Abbey Quarter, site of the former Smithwick's Brewery, is a strategic city centre site located on the banks of the River Nore and accessed off Ireland's Medieval Mile, a unique discovery trail running through the heart of Kilkenny City. Kilkenny County Council entered into a 50-50 partnership with Ireland's Strategic Investment Fund and established Kilkenny Abbey Quarter Development Partnership. It has the responsibility for the commercial development of the plots, including the buildings on the Abbey Quarter. These buildings will include a mix of offices, residential, educational and retail uses, and will be delivered on a commercial basis. Kilkenny County Council is responsible for the delivery of the significant public realm, community and cultural infrastructure in the Abbey Quarter and the public library in the Mayfair building. The building follows a fabric-first approach by being built to a modern, high-performance standard. This reduces the need for heating and air conditioning the space and reduces the ongoing operational costs. Heating and air conditioning systems are of high efficiency, while the combination of intelligent lighting controls and LED fittings reduce the building's energy consumption further. In addition to a large photovoltaic array located on the roof of the building, this provides free renewable energy to the brewhouse and thus reducing energy costs. Some of the items' contribution to the LEED certification are its PV solar cells on the roof, higher performance and specification facade system, energy optimised lighting and sanitary ware, bicycle and shower facilities, enhanced water efficiency, high quality indoor environment, LEED accredited neighbourhood, and excellent levels of natural daylight. Work on the brewhouse will be complete and occupied with workers by Easter 2022. The Mayfair building is an iconic landmark located at the entrance to the Abbey Quarter. It holds huge importance for the people of Kilkenny in terms of its social heritage. The building was originally constructed as a ballroom and became one of the leading ballrooms in Kilkenny. Today, the Mayfair building will be converted into a modern public library for Kilkenny. Works will commence in the coming weeks and the library will open in spring 2023. Following a total investment of €2 million, the Riverside Garden and Skate Park have now been officially opened. The project provides a riverside walk from the tea houses at Bateman Quay to Greensbridge, with a temporary walkway provided in the area of the planned new urban park around St Francis Abbey. The Riverside Garden project incorporates the newly completed skate park, which opened to the public on Saturday the 1st of May 2021. Works will commence on the park around the Abbey in summer 2022 and will be open before the end of 2023. The completion of this stage of the project will provide members of the public with their first opportunity to access the former brewery site and is the first of a number of projects that will integrate the former brewery site into the city. The Abbey Quarter development has a city centre first at its core, a seamless complement to the medieval city for where generations to come can live, work, enjoy and play. So we encourage you to come to Kilkenny, the home of the Cats, and see why Kilkenny truly is a brilliant place to live, to work and to call home. Kilkenny is the place where business succeeds. Its perfect central location with a wide catchment area has a proven capacity to attract high calibre talent. Kilkenny is a vibrant place to live and to work, steeped in history and in rich culture. It is a place where people can come not only to make a living, but to make a life. The Abbey Quarter, site of the former Smithwick's Brewery, is a strategic city centre site located on the banks of the River Nore and accessed off Ireland's Medieval Mile, a unique discovery trail running through the heart of Kilkenny City. Kilkenny County Council entered into a 50-50 partnership with Ireland's Strategic Investment Fund and established Kilkenny Abbey Quarter Development Partnership. It has the responsibility for the commercial development of the plots, including the buildings on the Abbey Quarter. These buildings will include a mix of offices, residential, educational and retail uses and will be delivered on a commercial basis. Kilkenny County Council is responsible for the delivery of the significant public realm, community and cultural infrastructure in the Abbey Quarter and the public library in the Mayfair building. The building follows a fabric-first approach by being built to a modern, high-performance standard. This reduces the need for heating and air conditioning the space and reduces the ongoing operational costs. Heating and air conditioning systems are of high efficiency, while the combination of intelligent lighting controls and LED fittings reduce the building's energy consumption further. In addition to a large photovoltaic array located on the roof of the building, this provides free renewable energy to the brewhouse and thus reducing energy costs. Some of the items' contribution to the LEED certification are its PV solar cells on the roof, higher performance and specification facade system, energy optimised lighting and sanitary ware, bicycle and shower facilities, enhanced water efficiency, high quality indoor environment, LEED accredited neighbourhood and excellent levels of natural daylight. Work on the brewhouse will be complete and occupied with workers by Easter 2022. The Mayfair building is an iconic landmark located at the entrance to the Abbey Quarter. It holds huge importance for the people of Kilkenny in terms of its social heritage. The building was originally constructed as a ballroom and became one of the leading ballrooms in Kilkenny. Today, the Mayfair building will be converted into a modern public library for Kilkenny. Works will commence in the coming weeks and the library will open in spring 2023. Following a total investment of €2 million, the Riverside Garden and Skate Park have now been officially opened. The project provides a riverside walk from the tea houses at Bateman Quay to Greensbridge, with a temporary walkway provided in the area of the planned new urban park around St Francis Abbey. The Riverside Garden project incorporates the newly completed skate park, which opened to the public on Saturday the 1st of May 2021. Works will commence on the park around the Abbey in summer 2022 and will be open before the end of 2023. The completion of this stage of the project will provide members of the public with their first opportunity to access the former brewery site and is the first of a number of projects that will integrate the former brewery site into the city. The Abbey Quarter development has a city centre first at its core, a seamless complement to the medieval city for where generations to come can live, work, enjoy and play. So we encourage you to come to Kilkenny, the home of the Cats, and see why Kilkenny truly is a brilliant place to live, to work and to call home.
Well, hello again, and you're all very welcome back to Kilkenny Castle this morning. Hope you had a short coffee break. My thanks to Colette and to the speakers of the first two sessions this morning for their wonderful presentations. But we're now moving to a supercharged session looking at practical learning and best practice across these islands. And we're delighted in this session to be joined by John Mulholland, who's the Chief Executive of Laois County Council. John will be talking about the decarbonisation zones that are being rolled out across the Republic of Ireland at the moment. We'll then move seamlessly to Glasgow, where Kit England, who is the Green Economy Manager for Glasgow City Council, will talk to us about green growth strategies, obviously specifically in Glasgow. And then we'll move back here to Kilkenny Castle, where Mark Foley, Chief Executive of EirGrid, will close on renewables, opportunities and challenges. The questions have been rolling in. I see quite a number of them here on the chat box and in the emails. We would ask you to email, please, your questions from now on in. Hopefully, an email address is appearing on the screen just about now, I hope. Please send them in by that mechanism. We'll finish up then with a Q&A session. We'll pick up on all of the speakers, the key points from all of the speakers, and try to take as many of your questions as possible. Then finishing up with a quick wrap up and trying to close off on time by 12:30. So without further ado, I'm going to pass to our first speaker in this session, John Mulholland, who has been the Chief Executive of Laois since 2015. John is no stranger to complex environmental issues. He has led on the development of river management, catchment and rural water programs all across the southeast. And currently he's been working with his community in Laois to deliver a vision for a low carbon town model in Portlaoise. And we're going to hear now from John on the details of that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John, for that introduction. And just good morning, everybody. And excuse me, it's not a lack of courtesy. I'm not going to stand because I have a particular problem with a disc this morning over the last couple of days. So beg my indulgence in that, and to our colleagues upstairs. I just want to, I know Colette welcomed you here this morning to this fabulous venue, Kilkenny Castle. And it's great to be back to see real people. And I know to welcome on board as well the people who are attending on the hybrid meeting. And of course, as Colette said, I'm a resident of Kilkenny, and we call it the city CIT-IE. And going back to Jade's talk this morning, I didn't quite notice the 1887 blip for severe heat in Kilkenny. I think 33.3 degrees in June of 1887, and Colette is very protective of that record. And so she doesn't want to see any further global warming around these parts anyway. And we note that County Tyrone nearly pipped us during last July. And so I think Kilkenny holds on very dearly to that record. I'm just going to go through the slides. And before I get on to the decarbonisation, I just want to talk a little bit about our surroundings here, the fabulous Kilkenny Castle setting. And there's a slide down below there. And I'm sure those of you with a keen eye can see the resemblance in architecture, because I certainly can't. It was built, the Kilkenny Castle, by Strongbow. He was the second Earl of Pembroke. And he also spent some time in Laois and in many other areas around the southeast and the country indeed. And so the Rock of Dunamaze, or the Fort of Dunamaze, was built in 845 and was extended by Strongbow. He was some property speculator, some people would say. Of course, in Laois, we have a very excellent track record of planning enforcement. Both castles were done without planning consent, and I think in the 1300s and 1600s, in the early days of Laois County Council, that they did look at both at the nature of the development at Dunamaze. So that gives you some background to the setting. And so a lot of similarities, and while you are in this part of the country, make sure you drop in to see both. And so To speak specifically then about decarbonising zones, and first of all, where they come from, and I'm conscious there'll be a lot of overlap with previous speakers, so I won't go through some of it in detail. Paddy has already mentioned about the Climate Action Plan to tackle climate breakdown. It was published in June 2019, and then we move on to Action 165, specifically of that plan, which requires each local authority to identify and develop plans for at least one so-called decarbonising zone in its administrative area. And this was further underpinned in the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act, which Paddy also mentioned, and we must prepare rolling 5-year climate action plans. We think there are plenty of examples of similar kind of actions around Europe and around the world. Stockholm, Malmo, for example. In Belfast, the Power2X project, I believe. Dundalk, Dingle Creative and Innovative Hub, Mount Lucas Wind Farm, and the Cork Lower Harbour are all examples. There may be more. And so what are they specifically? And I don't want to give a kind of a textbook or academic explanation of what it has. This is a very much off-the-cuff explanation. It can be considered to be an area identified by a local authority in which a range of climate mitigation measures coexist to address low-carbon energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and climate action needs. It can also be regarded as a testbed for both technological development and wider behavioural change to pave the way for more permanent and more easily understood climate actions locally. And I think that's an equally important one. It gives kind of scope to local actors to be involved in developments in their own communities. And no matter what the scale of change in a decarbonising zone, it should be the case that active rather than passive community action is encouraged. And by this I mean that people or communities should not be waiting for change. Basically, those who are able and have a leadership role should be enabled to act on change, and communities must be active. It's not enough to wait for some silver bullet on the horizon that's going to change things locally. And that's an essential ingredient of a decarbonising zone, I think. Now, coming locally to my neck of the woods in Portlaoise, we already had embedded the concept of a low-carbon town, even though it wasn't quite called a decarbonising zone at that time. And indeed, things have moved on significantly since 2016, 2017, in terms of global targets legislation and so on. And while we were madly enthusiastic in 2017, we see the real pressure that has come upon governments and countries in the meantime. And so low carbon was a guiding principle of a vision statement that was prepared in 2017 and incorporated into the statutory development plan for the county. Action 165 further goes on to say that, and it identifies Portlaoise, and it says to develop Portlaoise as a low carbon town. And so we had, at that particular stage, in common with a lot of local authorities, we had the Covenant of Mayors signed up, that's fine, Climate Action Charter, draft county development plan changed and altered to accommodate some of the objectives of low carbon, sustainable energy, an energy performance officer appointed, climate adaptation team, always on the management team agenda for the county council management team. And of course, we had really, and continue to have seriously good intentions all around the community and the council. One of the things we did in the initial stages, and this was before any legislation or the climate action plan, before that, we set up an implementation group. And we're very grateful indeed to all those who take part in it, because it is a slow-moving animal, and you wouldn't be out of order to say you test your patience from time to time. So we've Gas Networks Ireland on board, Bord na Móna, ESB Networks, the Health Service Executive, the National Transport Authority, Irish Rail, who obviously a lot of business through Portlaoise as a hub, and Portarlington many rail services, Coillte, the Laois Partnership Company, IT Carlow, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, a Portlaoise Town Team, which is a very important part of that. And just to pause for a second, it represents all the business owners, retailers, and people with an interest in the progress of the local economy, and they want to be part of that action as well. And we have the Climate Action Regional Office from Kildare represented, and of course Laois County Council. And the key thing here is people need to be active. It's not good enough to sit by and watch it from what's happening from the ditch. People have to contribute to it. I'm going to move on to the geographic area, and I hope people can see that. That line that comes in a loop down around the right-hand bottom corner, that's the M7 from Dublin to Limerick, Cork. And inside it then is the town of Portlaoise, and there's a line there that goes up on the top third from south to north. That's the main rail line. And that red zone is our decarbonising zone that we've submitted to the department for consideration. And it coincides with the statutory local area plan boundary. And we set about selecting that because, first of all, that's where over 1/4 of the population of County Laois lives. It's where most of the carbon, not counting agricultural emissions, are produced. It aligns with the statutory boundary of Portlaoise Local Area Plan and is a natural follow-on from our low-carbon town concept. And some way into the Portlaoise project, it was decided to engage expertise to assist Laois County Council in measuring the carbon footprint. It's okay saying we're going to have low carbon. Do you know what you're doing at the moment? So we see that's a very important part of the mix. And Siemens, who you all know, international trading company, were awarded the brief by Laois County Council and issued their findings earlier on this year. And the clock has now been set with a start date of January 2020, against which we measure all emissions and all changes in Portlaoise, if we can manage to do that. And so what did Siemens find? And they found that in the decarbonising zone, it emits about 100,000, that's a nice round figure, of greenhouse gases per annum. And that's notwithstanding international travel, if you know what I mean, that people who are leaving the jurisdiction to go on foreign holidays or business trips, that's excluded. It'd be too complex. It's just what happens with people living, doing business and receiving education in the town and social interactions and sport and so on. And so the population, that's from a population about 23,000, which is slightly less than Kilkenny, about the same size as Portadown, maybe Killarney, those typical smaller size Irish towns. And a nice little pilot test bed for looking at that. So that equates to about 4 tonnes per person, and I heard this morning talking about, I think, 7 tonnes. And so this, you can understand this figure then, that it excludes other emissions. And that's per year, and it excludes, as I say, agricultural emissions and the travel zone. And they say that local solutions are best. Now, I have to say I liked the directness of the message from Siemens. No messing about. You should be providing energy solutions locally. Cut all the messing, get straight to it. But of course, throughout Europe, the model can be different, where in Scandinavian countries and parts of Germany, perhaps local jurisdictions have control or a say in energy provision. We don't, because of the structure we have here in Ireland. And these are emissions incurred, as I say, by the local community on a day-to-day basis. To show that in a kind of a breakup of a graph or a pie chart like that, you can see residential accounts for a good portion of it, also non-residential, passenger transport and freight transport. I won't go into detail, that's kind of self-explanatory. And in terms of register of opportunities, what they say is that onshore wind supplied via the grid would reduce the emissions by 3% in comparison to baseline. Onshore wind supplied directly to the town, that is a network of wind turbines in the locality, will have a major impact, reducing it by 34%. Rooftop PVs, photovoltaic cells, whether that's realistic or not, it's probably you all have your own views on it, but it's certainly a major undertaking. But if you take, for example, some of the retail stores that we know only too well, a lot of those are submitting planning applications for low energy solutions and the installation of PV on the roofs and so on. So every little bit helps. The retrofitting of legacy residential units, and Paddy had it as one of his points, that would account for 19% of reduction, which is not insignificant. It requires a lot of investment. And replace 5% in the first instance of conventional vehicles with electric vehicles. And so the Register of Opportunity states the provision of 5 locally situated wind turbines at 15 megawatts, 500,000 square meters of PV rooftop panels, retrofitting of 2,100 homes and replacing cars. That will achieve a 72% reduction of the carbon footprint. Easier said than done. Move on to the next slide, which shows in very easy to understand form what the footprint is now and what it should be. And you can apply this to the whole country, you could apply it to the whole island. We have to go there in a very short space of time. We have to reduce it by 50%. That is going to be some challenge. And by the way, there's more than carbon in there. There's 5 or 6 other greenhouse gases. This is what is required in simple, easy to see format of what's needed to be done. Local renewable energy down 35%, it'll drive it down by that. Retrofitting of homes down 19%. Electric vehicles, depending on your what point you want to choose, will bring it down further. But the main points are that decarbonising the energy supply is critical. No matter what way you look at it, that is just so fundamentally important. Reducing the demand for renewables is part of what we do in local leadership working with communities, demand reduction. I suppose in recent weeks what we're hearing about prices, that has its own effect in making people conscious of what they use. Probably the wrong way to go about it, because that's based on economic need or necessity, and reducing the demand overall. So basically our challenge is decoupling economic growth and social progress from increased demand for energy, the way the energy is produced at the moment. This kind of graph kind of raises the hair on the back of my neck, not because I'm excited or exhilarated about it, but because when I look at it, I say, my goodness, the challenge is immense. And this tries to show in very simple form, that yellow line on top means that even if we did everything and were grade A students in the community and did everything, retrofitting, took all the proper measures, we would still be meandering off the path of the targets for 2030. The blue line, which is a kind of a target line to get to where it is in 2030, means that we'd have to invest significantly. Now, that line isn't going anywhere like that in Portlaoise at the moment, or in any of your towns or counties. I would wager that that blue line, in fact, if you look at where we are in 2021, it has risen significantly, and it will continue to rise despite our best efforts for the next few years, unless and until somewhere in 2025, 2026, that the real measures to decarbonise energy come into play. And so that blue line might flatline, and then there should be a sharp decrease to 2030 to make it count. And what I'm saying is the yellow line tells us where we will be in 10 years, even with 2,000 homes retrofitted, and a transition to electric cars, cycle lanes, buses, routes, LED lighting and so on. It's a low carbon trajectory with population and economic growth. So doing everything, that's the lesson for us in Portlaoise. Decarbonising of energy is massive, and we must find approximately 80,000 tonnes. And you remember what I said earlier, we have 100,000 tonnes. We have to get 80,000 tonnes of that out of the equation by the year 2030. And you could just consider that graph again. It tells the story. On delivery, and I hope I'm doing okay on time, Chairman. On delivery, a few things we've done. The low carbon town public domain, we spent about 3 million on that, on things such as low E lighting, 2,500 replacements, urban schools, Blue Way, commencing now, cycle route development, solar compactor street bins, e-charging points, 30 number ongoing, and that's to be seen right across the country, I believe. We have a major €40 million urban regeneration project, reusing existing building stock, deep retrofitting of LA housing stock, about 5 million. That's about 190 houses, I think, in the Portlaoise and immediate vicinity. We set up a green business centre at the Cube. And I hear you say, where are you getting all this money, John? Well, we're getting it from the Urban Regeneration Development Fund, the Regional Enterprise Development Fund, Fáilte Ireland Destination Towns, and the Just Transition Fund. And we want to thank our partners in that for accepting our applications to make this transition. A few examples here. We all know the greenest building is the one you already have. This is an example here. It's a bit cluttered for you to see, but that's an old 1880s convent, an old school that we're developing with Sophia Housing Approved Housing Body, and 52 dwellings for people who have either elderly or special needs, and that'll be a nice campus when it's finished. We're we're designing it obviously with the Department of Housing and Local Government, and it fits all we're trying to do in relation to reducing traffic demand and so on. The delivery of a walkable green town, all the things that communities love this, and they're very keen on these measures and get really involved in this kind of stuff, all the green imaging and routes and garden projects and pollinator spaces, and that's all very much part of the Climate Action Act of 2021. Biodiversity is heavily mentioned in it. We've put in a number of e-charging points. You know, you could argue local authorities' role in this. We regard it as a leadership role rather than a service provision role, because there are other companies out there for ESB e-cars, for example, and we're not energy providers, but we do it nonetheless, and we are grant assistance under the Urban Regeneration Fund. So we're rolling out those. We also have this summer a new electric bus doing town trips, which is very good, a decision by a local bus operator based on the low carbon town concept. He was prompted into ordering a bus manufactured in Southeast Asia and brought it over to Ireland, and it's operating on a daily basis, so everyone's very happy with that. And that's part of our transition. The Cube is a centre of excellence for low carbon design, training and startups, bespoke professional services, and so that's underway at the moment. There's a manager appointed, and that'll be a service to the community. Getting near the end of it now, these are the things that low carbon towns and decarbonising zones should have. And I won't go through them in detail, but I'm going to point at two things there. One is over on the left-hand side of that slide, you'll see an anaerobic digester that's producing gas, or has planning permission to produce gas for the equivalent of about 8,000 homes. And down in the bottom, the wind turbines. And these are the two things that people don't like beside them. And I'll speak about that later. And I'll be interested in Mark's views later on the problems we have with delivery in this area. So all those other things, people love it. There's a huge buy-in on cycle lanes, electric bus, retrofitting, charging points, greenways, and so on. And so I'm getting to the conclusion of this presentation, and I'm going to conclude with some observations to date. And I'm going to say that Laois County Council's investment of 1.3 million in replacing 2,500 streetlights in the town has yielded a saving of 750,000 kilowatts per annum. That's a saving about €125,000 per annum, or 320 tonnes of carbon. And that's only 0.35% of the total emitted from the town. For all our effort, it's just a drop in the ocean. Add on to that the experience we've had in COVID over the last 18 months. And we marked this and we measured it. And we say the working from home practice, and we await hybrid guidelines from or guidelines for hybrid working from home. That added an additional saving of 400 tonnes of CO2 per annum. So again, you would think it'd make a big difference, and it does, and these things are not to be dismissed. Every little incremental change makes a difference. And so those two together would account for about 0.8%, with all that effort. But if you add it cumulatively to all working from home kind of initiatives, it'll add to much more. The draft county development plan, which has been done in the middle of this, has put an enhanced emphasis on climate action, has included new provisions for once-off housing and new residential developments. In other words, it's kind of a test to see what kind of architectural design practices are coming in the submissions. Our efforts to date have been in reducing energy demand and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. Laois County Council, while acting in a leadership role, cannot control or necessarily lead the delivery of essential new renewable energy projects in their area. The main energy providers and manufacturing sectors are essential to the aim of achieving the statutory targets, and that's why it's so important that we act together, and that decarbonising of energy, in my view, is the main issue in the country at the moment. All the things we do at local level are good, but it's really the heavy hitters that we need to start moving into line at the moment. And this is the final slide, Chair. There is terrific enthusiasm from business owners and commercial sector, and they do, in fairness, try and make improvements in their own offerings, the way they do business, their own buildings, services to customers and so on. However, many communities And this is reflected right across the country. I know through my colleagues that this is an actual fact. They dislike green energy infrastructure, even energy infrastructure underground, and the necessary supporting networks. And by that I mean high voltage transmission cables underground. And this exerts sustained pressure on local representatives and even government ministers. And so it's really something we have to grasp. For example, and I'm asking this question to myself on a regular basis when applications come in for projects, is there an equivalence between local visual impact, for example, and the ongoing environmental and human impacts of climate change in the short, medium, and long term? For example, the disturbance of a bat, a Daubenton bat, or some species of bird, in comparison to the impact on the human race and social and commercial futures that we have, we need to look at these things again. And we need to go back to base camp and say, what does the country need? I really am of the firm view that the overriding public and environmental interest comes first, and we have to make that change. And so I think, and the conclusion, and decarbonising zones are very good for community activation and getting your mind focused on it, and it brings people together. But the more I look at it, and I'm glad that we have our colleagues here from the north today, and I laud the inclusion of this debate or this session at this particular time, so soon after COVID and we're all back together, that we really should be looking at an all-island decarbonising zone, because we're in a very good position to push this forward. And it's probably a better concept as we approach 2025, which was that point in the graph that I showed. Thanks, Chairman. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for sharing the ambition of Portlaoise with us this morning. Tremendous inspiration to all of us, and of course the notion of an all-island decarbonisation zone that you ended with there. I was struck by your approach, working with communities, ensuring that people in our towns and cities are active, and that's chimed very much with what Dr. Berman talked about this morning. We've created this situation. Humans have created this situation, so we collectively need to fix it. And that's been a theme throughout the discussion so far this morning. So moving from Portlaoise across to another community, this time in Glasgow, where we will now hear remotely from our colleague in Glasgow, Kit England. Kit is the Green Economy Manager for Glasgow City Council and has developed the Glasgow Green Deal. Kit has a wealth of experience in the climate change and adaptation areas, having managed the Climate Ready Clyde Partnership and has developed the Glasgow City Region Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan, a lot of which we heard about in earlier sessions. Kit also advises the Joseph Rowntree Foundation on its climate change and social justice programme, and is working with Newcastle, or has previously worked with Newcastle City Council on climate policy and economic development. So we'll pass now to Kit remotely from Glasgow. Thank you.
So good morning. My name's Kit England. I'm the Green Economy Manager for Glasgow City Council. And it's fantastic to be here with you today, and I am going to just talk a little bit about green development strategies in cities and regions, with a bit of focus on the challenges facing cities, and then some examples and responses, drawing on, I suppose, a few examples of what we're doing here in Glasgow through the work of our Glasgow Green Deal. So it's kind of pretty much a given at the moment that climate change is one of the biggest challenges facing cities and regions. And when you start to look at where we are and where we need to be, it's not hard to see why. So this graph here shows you the 2030 emissions gap. It's by an organisation called Climate Action Tracker, who track the commitments made by governments around the world and compare them with the trajectories agreed under the Paris Agreement. So what you can see, the black line shows you historical emissions, and then the blue at the top shows you the pledges and targets that are currently agreed by governments around the world, whereas the green shows you the emissions trajectory that we need to be on to be by the end of the decade to ensure that we are staying compatible with the aims of the Paris Agreement. So what really that shows you is there's this really big gap between where we are and where we need to be, and we need a significant step change in both mitigation, so cutting emissions, but also adaptation, building our resilience to the impacts of climate change as well. And this slide here from the WRI just shows you a little bit about how much acceleration is really needed. What does that look like in more concrete terms? So they sort of did an assessment of the progress towards global climate targets. And what you can see is in the green are actions that are on track if they're sustained, and there's a couple there on agriculture. But the yellow in the bottom left is where they feel that there's insufficient progress and acceleration needed by 2030. The size of that acceleration, okay? So, at the top, the kind of share of electricity in final energy use in industry needs to accelerate 1.4 times where it is now. Whereas, if you look nearer the bottom around transport, the sale of electric vehicles, or the share of them in the total vehicle stock needs to scale significantly. This is not really to get into the detail of kind of what needs to happen and when, but just to indicate and give a flavour of the scale of pace and change that we need to be moving forward with on mitigation. So how do we think about all of these challenges in Glasgow? And there are some other local challenges that I'll come on to talk to in a minute. But actually what we're doing is thinking about the framing of our economy. And what we've said is that we need to overhaul our economic model to one that puts people and the environment first. And, in the literature, there are multiple definitions and conceptual framings emerging for this concept. It's broadly under the umbrella of green economy, but you have issues such as, or framings such as donut economics and the Green New Deal are just kind of a couple of the framings that are emerging. But all of them really have some common principles at their heart, and I've drawn these from the Green Economy Coalition's work that they did a couple of years ago around, principles for inclusive green economies. And so the first is around well-being, thinking about making sure that people have, that economies are focusing on providing people with the conditions for well-being. Second is around justice and equity, and making sure that, as well as thinking about well-being in the round, that we're making sure there's a particular focus on those people who need who are either at the risk of the transition around climate change, that concept of the just transition, but more generally around the share of resources and the share of our economic success as well. The third is around planetary boundaries, and I've put a little diagram on the right from Johan Rockström around the kind of global assessment of where we are against the kind of planetary boundaries of Earth, but making sure that we try and reorient our economies to ones which work within those boundaries rather than going beyond. Third is around efficiency and sufficiency. The fourth is around efficiency and sufficiency, making sure we improve our products and processes and making sure that we have enough for people. And the fifth is around good governance as well, making sure we have the right institutions and processes to manage that change. And this just shows you a little bit of the challenges around climate change that we face locally here in Glasgow. So the diagram on the left shows you the spread of greenhouse gas emissions. Some of those are around, we have some significant challenges on buildings, making up around half of our emissions, and transport making up another third. And on the right, we have our challenges around adaptation, where we have 67 different climate change risks and opportunities with varying degrees of progress and urgency for addressing them, which is a great piece of work that was done by Climate Ready Clyde, our regional partnership on adaptation a couple of years ago. And this just shows you the impact that acting on climate change will have on our economy. In terms of GDP, and this is just about, the orange line shows you the impact of climate change on GDP without adaptation. So if we don't cut our emissions and we continue on business as usual, and the yellow line shows you just the benefits of adaptation on their own. And I think it's just sort of saying that both mitigation and adaptation are in our economic self-interest. That was all I was really trying to say with this. But I mentioned a couple of other challenges that we face as a city region. The other is around our economic models really extractive, and this diagram just shows you the material flows in Scotland a couple of years ago and how much of them actually end up circular and re-enter the Scottish economy, which is a very, very small line in green that you can see in the top in recycling. The rest of those resources end up as greenhouse gas emissions or landfill or incineration or other emissions, and that's really, really a challenge that we also need to think about the extraction and the damage that causes. At the same time, we have significant inequality in our city as well, with a varying degree of life expectancy, both across in the round, but then also a big disparity between men and women as well, where women live longer in Glasgow than men do, and actually whether you're in the west or the east of the city, that varies by over 10 years as well. And then finally, we've seen the impacts of COVID as well. The impacts of the pandemic haven't been felt evenly here in Glasgow. We've had a disproportionate impact on young people who tend to be employed in jobs within the sectors that have been most affected, like retail and hospitality. But also we have a greater impact, within that kind of younger age bracket, there's also a greater impact on women than men as well. So I suppose what we're trying to say is, although our focus is around climate action in the medium term, those are kind of driven by wider connected drivers, from our economic and social systems. And many of the causes of the challenges from COVID or systemic inequality are linked, are the same as those with climate action as well. So really where we're coming up on is we're realising that continuing to work through gradual incremental changes is not going to be enough, and what we now need to do is a fundamental transformation of economic and social and financial systems to trigger those exponential increases in decarbonisation and climate resilience. And if you want a good example, you don't need to look much further than the COVID recovery plans. This kind of graph shows you an assessment of where we are with current 2020 policies or with the sustainable recoveries. Although we've had those calls for building back better, how are we actually doing at the global scale? And what you see, the red line shows you the 2020 policies for climate action on mitigation. The yellow line show you what that looks like with sustainable recoveries. And the blue shows you that path again to net zero. And, it just shows you that what we've achieved so far on recovery has been about incremental change. And what we need is much more systemic, deeper transformational change. So how do we get there? Well, cities now have multiple recovery pathways to choose from. And this is great sort of diagram from a study around different policy responses. And actually, they highlight that kind of crossroads or multiple paths we find ourselves at. So, business as usual, by 2045, which is the target for net zero in Scotland overall. Glasgow's a little bit earlier at 2030, but it shows you, with business as usual, we're potentially on a trajectory where fossil fuel energy still dominates, that kind of action's taken place within current systems, and so we still see that systemic inequity and poverty. We have expensive impacts of climate change, and we're also dealing with things like health crises and social crises. And also, with limited adaptation, we're seeing increased mortality, morbidity and displacement from climate impact. I don't think we're really in that space anymore globally. I think, that debate is starting to move now with announcements we've seen, for example, this week at the UK level around, decarbonising the energy system, etc. So we're more probably in the middle, which is around traditional cost-based policies, which take place within the current system and look at sort of delivering a mixed fossil fuel and renewable system, particular reliance on gas, but it doesn't really address some of those systemic inequities, and we're seeing marginal reductions on climate impacts and the cost of those. At the bottom, we see Green New Deal policies, which are more about designing, not just a zero emissions energy system, but thinking about equity and health as part of that, through environmental and social justice, and thinking about high levels of resilience and adaptation, which are minimising the impacts of climate change and displacement, thinking really holistically about that. And so the real question for cities and regions is which of those pathways do you want to face, and how do you deliver that kind of I suppose that step change in ambition that kind of we've committed to in our targets, but now we have to very quickly bring through to delivery. And a big part of that has been thinking about the systems innovation landscape. So I suppose there was a recognition by the European Commission a couple of years ago that the main obstacle to the climate transition isn't really the solutions in terms of technologies, but their capacities to implement them at pace and scale. And they sort of say in that quote on the right that the present silo-based form of governance that's designed and developed for traditional city operations and services can't drive that ambitious climate transition, and therefore we need to look much more about our underpinning systems. So systems innovation is really about changing the approaches to the things that define the way that we deliver climate action at the moment: our political economy, our finance, our governance, our regulation, our culture, our skills, etc. And the EU's at the vanguard of that, where it's launched 2 missions in the last week seeking to create 100 climate neutral cities and 150 resilient regions by 2030. And those are predicated on citizen involvement and business involvement to design these portfolios of interventions based on systems insights. And it builds on a range of different work that's been going on over the last few years around, Climate Kick's Deep Demonstrations Programme. Sweden has its Viable Cities initiatives. Dark Matter Labs have been running system demonstrators. And here in the UK, we've seen things like the Department for Innovation and Public Purpose at the University of UCL, that have developed all of these mission-based approaches. And it's translating through to interesting new concepts and initiatives, like the idea in Milan of neighbourhoods as a service, where those improvements that we need for net zero and for adaptation are delivered through a service-based model rather than direct capital investment. Or here in Glasgow, it's helped us think about the processes for developing a revolving fund for retrofit, where we think about integrating mitigation and adaptation together. So our way of doing that is through the Glasgow Green Deal. And that's our initiative to increase the pace and scale of decarbonising and building resilience to climate change in a way that creates jobs and prosperity in high quality places and tackles poverty. So it's not a new plan or a strategy, but we're proposing a 9-year mission working with businesses, citizens and governments to deliver that systemic transformation in line with our existing targets of being net zero and climate resilient by 2030. And that will be a range of different things. It will be investments, its initiatives, its innovation, its policies and its plans designed around those 3 interlinked objectives as well. And how, when we get this graph is a helpful kind of illustration, I suppose, or this diagram is a helpful illustration of the investment needs of what that really looks like. So working with the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission and Bankers Without Boundaries, they have done a kind of an assessment of the current plans and policies and the amount of finance that's needed to deliver them. So what you can see here is that energy efficiency dominates our investment needs, with 24 billion across the energy efficiency spectrum, or across commercial, industrial and domestic. But transport is also big, the deployment of renewables is big, waste, green infrastructure, adaptation and resilience. And this is kind of just what's written down, right? This is kind of not everything that needs to happen. But it's important that we recognise as well, this is not about the city investing in everything. It's about stewarding a process which allows that investment to happen across the public and private sectors as well. So I mentioned we're planning to launch a 9-year mission. Our mission is around delivering equitable, net zero and climate resilient living in Glasgow by 2030. It's an ambitious target, but actually it can be fundamentally done. There's not a reason why. There's no kind of, there are lots of different barriers, but there's no kind of fundamental reason that can't be delivered. It sets a clear direction, and it's designed in a way to encourage that cross-disciplinary, cross-sectoral and cross-actor innovation. At risk in our economic system and our politics reinforce poverty, exclusion and inequality. The impacts of climate change and the need for equity and fairness place limits on our current economic model. And at the same time, our ability to reduce risk and emissions is determined in part by our economic models and that need for justice and equity too. So they're mutually reinforcing. And so our mission seeks to operate in a number of different domains of change. So we'll either have domains which have a systems focus. So you can see we have maximising energy efficiency, renewables deployment, mobility, residual emissions, adaptation and resilience. Those are all domains of which we need significant change, but at the same time we also have a place-based sort of focus within those domains as well. So they might come together, and action might focus on a number of those different domains, but in a particular place. And then underneath that, we've identified this enabling framework and set of levers of change, which will be applied in each of those different domains in different combinations to bring progress together. And in terms of how we facilitate that process and that mission, this is our overarching delivery approach, where over the next sort of year or two, we bring together a set of activity which starts to orchestrate that mission and begins to scale up and deliver that approach. So we have, we'll be launching a roadmap and engagement and call for ideas shortly at COP. But actually the idea is that we will have 3 strands of activity that are our kind of Green New Deal unit that we're proposing will undertake. One around co-design, which is about kind of working with Glaswegians and with communities and with businesses to look at a set of pathways for that transition over the next decade. At the same time, strand 2 is about innovation, market making and skills, which is about saying, well, what are the new markets that we need? What are the new solutions that we need and how do we scale them up? And what are the skills that we need to deliver that transition at scale? And then strand 3 is around financing. So how do we make sure that in economic and financial terms, we can deliver that scale of change that we need? And then around the edges, we have horizon scanning and new initiatives feeding in. We have a process of iterative reflection, monitoring and evaluation and learning that will make sure that all of the activities going on in the Green Deal we will be learning from those and using the kind of lessons to accelerate progress. We'll have early wins from the programme itself spun out and kind of being delivered on an ongoing basis. And a key part is that we'll have citizen involvement into the design, direction and implementation of all of those different strands. And then in the background, there is a range of activity already underway in the city and the wider region that will be folding in and under the umbrella of the Green Deal as well. And this kind of just shows you in a little bit more detail what the programme, each of those programme areas are and the sort of purpose of those and the indicative activities as well. And I'm not proposing to go through there, but I think it's just worth having, and you can perhaps either pause the recording or look at the slides if they're available for download afterwards as well. I mentioned some of that kind of existing activity that's already underway as part of the early Green Deal activity. Just to quickly provide a quick overview of some of those. We've just been finishing work on a citizens' assembly where we've had a range of different citizens that represent the kind of the demographic mix in Glasgow who develop a series of recommendations for us to think about how do we develop our city and our economy in a way that's compatible with climate change. We're working on a regional just transition skills action plan to set out how do we make sure that our skills system is preparing to scale up to the challenge, but also to make sure that the people most affected by the transition or the impacts of climate change are supported to access the opportunities of that transition. We're developing a corporate mobility pact, a new partnership between businesses and the city in partnership with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is designed to try and accelerate the rollout of solutions for sustainable travel. We've been looking at our business support programme and we're attaching conditionality. So businesses will need to have a net zero and climate resilience target in place to make sure that they're able to access our business support in future. And we're also dedicating new programmes of business support. We then have a range of target investment programmes, so things like plans for a new Glasgow region-wide Glasgow Metro, a retrofit programme for 400,000 homes, the deployment of 18 million trees over the next decade, and we're also developing a region-wide EV charging network as well. More broadly, we're also thinking about aligning the city's financial flows in a way that's compatible with the Paris Agreement, and our new Green Print for Investment, which we launched earlier this month, is looking to steward wider investment into £30 billion of private sector action as well as public sector projects as well. But it's not just thinking about the public sector as a way of delivering all of those initiatives, but also as a custodian for their area and stewarding that kind of broader financial change that we need to see about. So I mentioned very briefly the next steps for all of our work on the Green Deal as a kind of growth strategy for the city region is that we'll be launching our roadmap and call for ideas at COP, outlining what the Green New Deal is, asking for ideas about how people can get involved and outlining our approach for citizen and public sector and private sector involvement. And we'll be looking to then turn that into a full delivery approach from early next year, and that will be backed by the appropriate political mandate, budget and resources. So I hope that's been a useful overview of the challenges facing cities and regions in developing green economic strategies and some of the emerging approach from here in Glasgow as well. I hope that's been useful. I look forward to hearing the other presentations from the speakers and to take your questions as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kit, and for that, again, inspirational session on the place-based approach that you're taking in Glasgow. And from here in Kilkenny, we wish everybody in Glasgow a very successful COP26, obviously in November. John mentioned earlier that decarbonising energy is the key issue. If we don't do that, we're not going to reach our targets. So that brings us nicely to our last session today, which is led by Mark Foley, Chief Executive of EirGrid. I'm delighted that Mark can join us here physically in Kilkenny Castle. Mark has been the Chief Executive of EirGrid since June 2018, but has also successfully grappled with huge transformative change programmes in previous roles in Colcha and in major capital projects with Dublin Airport Authority. So we're delighted to finish this morning with Mark, and I'll pass over to you now. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Slides? Oh, sorry, I've got to press the button. When Colette called me, what was it, about 6 or 8 months ago, I was absolutely delighted at the invitation, and I'll tell you for 2 reasons. One is, one of the toughest parts of my jobs is communing what the hell we do on the grid. It's a complex area, and most people feel somewhat alienated by it. But secondly, and most importantly, to get a platform with some of the most important leadership group in the country, North and South, which is the CEOs of county councils, was an opportunity I was never going to turn down. You folks are absolutely at the epicenter of transformation. You sit between policy and making it happen on the ground, and you are incredibly important to this transition in the next 10 years. Also, you do sit at this really complex interface between communities, who are one of our biggest challenges, winning hearts and minds, business, who are really important to economic growth, and politics. We have one of the most sophisticated Western democracies. And with that comes, great openness and transparency, etc., and also deep challenges as political positions get taken in different ways. So from that perspective, it's a great opportunity to talk to you as leaders, because I feel we're part of the same ecosystem in terms of what we want to achieve. Bit depressed about your wonderful presentation, Jade, and the bleak picture it presents. And also, I suppose I feel at a personal level 1.5 is gone. I don't think we're going to achieve it. But why am I optimistic here this morning? I'm optimistic for a number of reasons. Number one, President Biden bringing the United States back into the fold in terms of the Paris Agreement. I think COP26 could be, and I hope it will be, a game changer. And I think that the third reason for my optimism is, look at what 2 jurisdictions on this island have done in the last couple of months. Eamon Ryan has had the low carbon and climate action bill approved. That is arguably the most transformative piece of legislation in the history of Ireland as a sovereign state. And the Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland, who we've worked closely with, are about to launch what I believe is a really visionary ambition in the same space, and particularly around electricity. So there's a huge optimism and context around commitment to change coming from government. And finally, cast your mind back to 2007, 2008 in both Ireland and Northern Ireland. There was very little renewables on the power system. And a Green minister said, let's go for 40% by 2020. And most people thought he was bonkers. And people thought you couldn't build the wind farms, and people thought you couldn't have that much renewables on the power system. At the end of last year, across the island of Ireland, the number for renewables from electricity on the power system was 43% across the year. So it can be done when people put their mind to it, when you have the right policy, and when you have the right leadership. And that's what we are. We're the leaders who I think need to make this happen over the next 10 years. What's EirGrid's purpose? Just to remind you about who we are, what we do. We manage the power system on a 24/7 basis, 365 days of the year across the island of Ireland. And I suppose we're proud as an exemplar north-south combined proposition which delivers service to customers in Northern Ireland and Ireland. And the second dimension is we also run the market, and the market's getting a lot of negative press at the moment because of prices of gas and costs of electricity, etc. But that's our job, is to make sure you have electricity, that the market's competitive, and thirdly, and most importantly, we plan the system of the future. And our current sense of purpose, which came out with our strategy 2.5 years ago, is to transform the power system for future generations. Transform because this is a revolution, not an evolution. To get from 40% to 70%, which is the government policy, and 80% as of last Monday with the National Development Plan, we have to do revolutionary things on the power system. The power system, because it's no longer just about the grid, it's about the whole ecosystem. It's about generation, it's about where demand is going to go, it's about data centres, it's about grid, it's about technology. It's a very complex, broad ecosystem, and we've got to make the whole thing work together. And lastly, it's about future generations. It's about our children, our grandchildren, of which I have 2. This is the decade in which we'll determine what their future looks like. And I could put it to you as CEOs of councils north and south, that you could probably take that sense of purpose yourselves, just change power system for your domain. You're in the transformation business, and you're also talking about the legacy you're going to leave for future generations. What's EirGrid's strategy? 6 deliverables, crystal clear in terms of what needs to be done, and it'll be very easy to look me in the eye in 5 or 6 years or 10 years' time and say you did it or you didn't do it. We have to add another 10,000 megawatts of renewables on the power system. So at the moment, across the island of Ireland, we have about 5,500. It's mainly offshore, onshore wind, a little bit of solar in Northern Ireland. We have to do in 10 years what took us 15 years to date. A big chunk of that's going to be offshore wind in the Irish Sea. We have to get it built, we've got to get it connected, and we've got to get it powered onto the system. And if we can get that renewables on the system, the prize of 70, 80% of our energy coming from renewable sources, our electricity, is deliverable. We've got to fix the grid. The grid is not fit for purpose. We've taken a lot of criticism, much of it justified over the last number of years. But there will be more pylons, there will be more substations, but there will be a lot of underground solutions. It won't all be just about overground lines, and there will be technology on the grid. And our job is to transform the grid to make it fit for purpose, to be able to handle that renewables. We need to deliver more interconnection. Interconnection is critical to keep the system stable, to manage security supply, and our flagship project of Celtic, which is to connect us to France, is well underway, and I'll talk about that later. We need, as of today, the power system can handle 70% renewables at a point in time. We're trialling 75. If you're to make the numbers add up and have a power system that's on average 70 to 80% by 2030, you need to be able to operate at close to 100%. And there's a pathway to do that. The market needs to evolve. If investors don't have the confidence and don't believe that they can make money in their investments, then you can do all the rest and we'll still fail. So the issue around involving the market, and there's been a lot of discussion about regulation in the last number of weeks, security, supply, etc. The market is a critical part of the solution. And lastly, we need to reduce our own emissions. We want to be an exemplar company in terms of how we do our business, how we procure, etc. What have we achieved to date? Since we launched our strategy 2.5 years ago, we have a new organisation, and I won't go into that, but leadership and people are absolutely critical, and I believe we have the right people in the right roles to drive this forward. We were delighted with the outcome of the first set of new auctions last year. 800 megawatts of solar has come through in Ireland and 400 megawatts of onshore wind. So solar energy will be on the Irish power system for the first time at scale within the next 12 months. And we could have done with it this summer when there was the worst year for wind in 60 years, I should say. The government asked us to do an offshore study about the roadmap for offshore wind in Ireland. We produced that study last year, and to our surprise and to a deep sense of, I suppose, pride and privilege, the government has given us the job of being the future planner and owner of offshore assets in Ireland. Infrastructure, we've made significant improvements on our ability to deliver infrastructure, and I'll point to 3 things and let's say walk the talk in this regard. We've taken a lot of criticism about pylons and wires, etc. We made 3 decisions last year that would have been unheard of 5 years ago. The converter station for the Celtic Interconnector is not going to be put in the best technical location. It's going to be put 30 kilometres away because that's what communities want. The Meath Kildare project, which is one of the most important pieces of infrastructure to improve the ability of Dublin to get power, is going to be done underground. We've listened to what communities have said. And thirdly, the new line to Mayo is also going to be done underground. So we've faced up, we've listened, and we've made big decisions. On the Celtic Interconnector, the planning application was lodged in June, and we're hopeful, quietly confident. The level of objection has been very low, our observation. We hope to have a positive decision in the new year. I mentioned renewables, and I won't talk about regulation. And COVID-19, we got through COVID-19 and didn't have an interruption to power. And I think I'm proud of that in terms of my organisation. We all had to up sticks, leave the office. If our control room operators had a run on COVID, there's only a certain number of them trained to run the grid, we would have been in big trouble. Looking ahead, what's in front of us this year, we're in the middle of it and beyond. COVID is still there. It's still impacting us. We're going to hybrid working shortly. I want to talk about shaping our electricity future. It was carried out between March and June of this year. It has been said, indeed by the Minister, it was the most ambitious piece of public consultation by a state agency. It was 14 weeks. We put all the data out and we said, please talk to us and give us your views on the best grid pathway to 2030. We want to achieve 70% renewables on the power system. There's different ways you can do it, and everybody will have a different view. 420 people made submissions. We were absolutely just delighted about the quality and the engagement, etc. And we will publish the outcome of that in the next couple of weeks. My ask of you, folks, is read it, understand it. It's an all-island proposition. We've the Northern Ireland bit, we've the Irish bit. Please engage, please understand, because when I get to the next point, which is arguably the hardest part of my job, I suggest it's one of the hardest parts of your job, is winning hearts and minds. How do we get people, ordinary people, to want to be part of the transition and not to adopt I don't want it in my backyard, or that's for somebody else? How do we get them engaged? And I think transparency around information, sometimes making decisions you'd prefer not to make, but that's part of it. And I think as a coalition, you CEOs, myself, and some other state utilities, we've a huge job on doing that. The Celtic planning application, we hope we get a positive result. We're ramping up in infrastructure. A lot of what we have to do, we cannot do on our own. So we've put a huge emphasis on partnerships, signing up global companies in order to work with us over the next 5 to 10 years on delivering critical technical solutions that allow the grid to operate at close to 100% renewables. So we've signed up approximately 8 major companies in the last 10 months. And we've also reframed our relationship with DSB because they work in partnership with us to deliver the infrastructure on the ground. On security supply, you'd need to have been on a different planet if you weren't hearing about blackouts and risk to supply this winter. Facts are very simple. We're the worst summer for wind in 60 years, and 2 major plants on the Republic of Ireland system went out on a force majeure basis. So we were tight, very, very tight. Those plants will be back shortly. I'm not saying there isn't risk in the months ahead and coming into the winter, and indeed beyond. The system is tight, but I think we have things under control. Unfortunately, and disappointingly, new gas capacity has not come through as quickly as we would have liked, and the coal plants are likely to stay open more longer. That goes against everything we're talking about today, everything I'm trying to achieve, everything you're trying to achieve. But it's an unfortunate consequence of the fact that the market hasn't delivered. And when I go back to my earlier slide about market evolution, regulators have to fix the issues in the market so the right technology comes through, so that the whole journey to a decarbonised system doesn't get stopped or arrested in any way. And lastly, I think I just want to mention, EirGrid we will go public very shortly on how we plan to realise the offshore policy ambition the Minister has set. We've a plan for 2030, and we'll have a plan for post-2030. So I'm going to leave you with a final slide, and it does speak to the leadership construct, my leadership role, your leadership role and obligations. And it's interesting when you reflect on leadership, You think of a gentleman in his well into his 90s who has had such an impact on us all in terms of challenging us, getting us to think about responsibility and what we should be doing, and a young lady still in her teens, I think, although she's been around a few years at this stage. And I just really want to emphasize, like, our role, yours and mine, is hugely about leadership, convincing people and bringing them on the journey to a new economy and a new society. We set the tone, what we say, how we speak, the conviction we have or don't have, our willingness to face up to challenges will dictate how a lot of people respond. There are many detractors and antagonists, but they shouldn't stop us doing what is the right thing, which is to lead from the front, and that's our job. And I'm just so glad I got this opportunity to talk to you folks, because we're very much in this together. And I am absolutely happy at any point, if I can help you in any way, whether it's through just local issues on the ground or whether it's in terms of communicating what we do, please pick up the phone again, Colette, or any of you. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for that last session. I promised you a supercharged last session of best practice and practical learning, and that's indeed what we got. Thanks very much to John, to Kit over in Glasgow, and to Mark for finishing there, and fantastic to hear of those renewable percentages that you hit back last year, in excess of 40%. So the questions have been rolling in. We're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so trying to get through as many of those as we possibly can. I'm going to have to try and navigate those on my phone, so I'm not checking social media. I'm trying to go through the questions as we've got them. Perhaps best to start with you, Mark. You talked about the need to add 10,000 megawatts with renewable connections into the system in the next 10 years, I think you said, and the requirement that we can only do that through investor confidence. And yet you talked of the challenge that we're currently facing with market delivery. Could you say a little bit more about that and your personal view on how we might deliver that scale of project within such a short period of time?
So here's the contradiction. On the renewable space, there's huge investor confidence. That's because the government have been really clear around policy. The first auctions happened last year, and the first 1.2 gigawatts came through. I mentioned solar, and I mentioned more onshore wind, and the next auctions are scheduled. So I'm less concerned. Ireland Inc., Ireland North and Ireland South have phenomenal pipelines of really good projects with really good developers who've done it before in other jurisdictions, and I believe this is going to happen. The biggest impediment at the moment is getting the offshore legislation through the Dáil, out the other end. The developers are out in the IRC at the moment. They're doing surveys. They're lodging. They're in consultation, and so far so good. There hasn't been an uproar, and I think we're in a good place on renewables. I think on conventional generation, where the system is stressed and where you need gas to see us through into the next decade. Let's be clear, and in fairness to the ministers, North and South, they're all aligned on that, but the gas plants have not come through, the new gas generation. And there's very deep discussions going on between government, regulators and ourselves in Ireland around making sure that the next round of auctions deliver the gas capacity. And I think all the right people are having the right conversations about that.
Thanks, Mark. So right conversations and critical decisions needed.
Yeah. Absolutely.
John, one for you that's come in, obviously inspired by the progress that you've made in Portlaoise and your parting comments about scaling it up to an all-island basis. How do you think we can start to do that?
Well, first of all, thank you, questioner, for the question, because looking at it for the last number of years, we can't do it in isolation, that's for sure. And even when you think about it, if we have a program supported by government or local resources to retrofit housing, where do you get energy? You put in heat pumps, and the program is 600,000 heat pumps over the period of National Development Plan and Housing for All and so on, and they require electricity. Moving towards electric vehicle fleet, they require electricity. They require more medium voltage or transmission line changes to provide that. So you're always taking these quantum leaps, and you say it's beyond the capacity of any individual jurisdiction to do that. And that's why I'm saying it's so important that Mark and ESB Networks and others in the field come together to address this. And that's my net point, but I think it's a pertinent question, because after all, if you take the population of the island, you know, approaching 7.5, maybe 8 million, and probably in the next 20 years exceeding what the population of the island ever was, we have to work together towards this aim. And we have an abundance of opportunities for renewable energy, I think, on the edge of the North Atlantic, with wind, wave, primarily wind, and some solar. And gas as well, that we shouldn't forget, because we're an agricultural country. That is an abundance of growth that goes into other forms of agricultural byproducts, CH, you know, methane emissions and so on. So that's my net point there. Okay.
And of course, working together is something that we do well on this island. We're doing increasingly better, and this forum and this network is a great platform to take that forward. We have quite a few other questions. One for Jade from earlier. Perhaps you could make your way over to the mic. Thanks, Jade. And I suppose it's on the same theme. How can Climate NI, particularly in the north, help us make this happen? What do you think the single most important thing we need to do in Northern Ireland is right now as local authorities?
I think you probably need to start building capacity, because that needs to be across all of your staff, across all of their remits. So I would start off with that, because you need people to be able to do stuff. So in order to get them to do stuff, they need to know what they need to do. So if you start off with that, with getting their training in place and get people up and going, they can start training others. You can get that cascade effect to be able to get the right actions at the right time.
That's a good point. That takes me on to Paddy's presentation and the CARO network that exists here. Thank you, Jade, for that. 29,000 staff you're training across the island at this moment in time, Paddy. A huge, huge logistical exercise, something that we hope to replicate at some point in the north. What about your elected representatives? Are they part of that? How do you bring them with that movement? How do we equip them as decision makers to make the right decisions in the future?
Yeah, John, our elected members are part of one of the pillars. I think the leadership pillar is the first one. So as 17 local authorities have already undertaken the leadership pillar. So in our case in Longford, we were one of the first off the block, I think, in January of this year. So we have 18 elected members, and at our training, 15 of the elected members were available on the day, as well as the management team and the senior officers. So there was a huge take-up. And I think, you know, that we get updates from the CAROs on a regular basis at our committee meetings. We just see the progress of the training across the other local authorities. And our level of take-up is being repeated and replicated. And I know Louth had theirs just a couple of weeks ago, and I think they've had huge take-up there too. And it's a very, very positive, very well planned, very well presented training programme, and the sort of I suppose the word of mouth amongst councillors to their colleagues around the country has passed on this, so that when it comes to their particular county or city, the take-up is generally very good. So our elected members are definitely part of the programme.
That's very encouraging. Thanks for that, Paddy. I suppose on a similar theme and scaling it up, Kit, the question that has come in relation to Glasgow is cities and stakeholders within cities with so many huge and differing aspirations. How do you channel all of that energy to go in one direction with one single strategic outcome and output? How have you achieved that in Glasgow?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the key things that I would sort of bring to the table is about, I suppose, having a clear idea of what and a shared idea of what the destination is, but not necessarily everyone kind of signed up to exactly the right way to get there. What we've got to try and do is orchestrate and collaborate rather than predefining the roles of individual partners on that journey. So, with on the adaptation side, through our Climate Ready Climate Partnership, we have a kind of common theory of change, which has been worked together with 140 different stakeholders, about what that journey looks like. So what does adaptation look like, and what are the building blocks? Jade mentioned capacity building, that's a really big part of it. And the same is around mitigation. The wind sort of sector is a really good example of how to get all of that right. How do you get all of the different levers of change, the different actors kind of working in a way in concert with one another, where you get that pipeline for really big change happening. But we need to replicate that across all the different systems that happen in a city. So it's not just about renewable generation, well, that's really important for us. It's also about energy efficiency. And some really big problems or challenges and barriers in the way that energy efficiency systems work at the moment, which is why we're not getting that throughput of investment into commercial property and into domestic property. So, that kind of, I suppose, the umbrella controlling idea of where you're trying to go to, and that mission for us that we're bringing forward around equitable net zero living by 2030 is a way where everyone can see their kind of the destination and where they're going to, and think about where their role in that system kind of needs to be. But at the same time, as a city, we need to kind of steward that process and orchestrate that process and recognize that different actors have different roles to play, and kind of encourage people to step into that space. And I think it's also really important to say that there are a lot of, although we have lots of great action underway, there's lots of organizations who are not yet at the table, who are not thinking about what their contribution could be. We touched a little bit on climate literacy training or capacity building training for lots of different institutions, and we're doing some of that here in Glasgow as well for exactly that reason. It allows people to reflect on where their role is in the change process too.
Yeah, so you've come a long way still to go, but testament to the great leadership shown by Glasgow City Council. And I think perhaps that maybe segues into a question I've just seen there for you as well, Mark. You talked about the necessity to collaborate with local authorities, that we can't do this in silos, that we need to work together across the sectors. This question is specifically, how can local authorities, what can we do to help facilitate renewable energy generation?
Great question. I'd be familiar with some of the challenges that local authorities have, and particularly with elected members who take particularly, shall I say, what's the word, regressive or anti-views. But remember how successful we've been. There's 5,500 megawatts of onshore wind on this island at the moment. And there's lots of projects getting through planning every day. I think do the right things in terms of making sure your county development plans speak to government policy. And I know you have difficulties at times with elected members going offside in that regard. And it's a relentless communications challenge. It is to really to face down people who say no, but they don't have an alternative. And the consequences of us not acting in this decade are really serious, as Jade has set out. So we have to be brave and face up to these people and not get bullied or intimidated from doing the right thing here. And I think it's incumbent on us all to sort of collaborate in that way around a clear, straightforward narrative and pushing on with all of the things we have to do.
Yeah.
And the time for talking is over to a large extent.
Absolutely, absolutely indeed. So I think that's the key message from all of the sessions this morning. The time for talking is over. The time for talking actually nearly this morning is over as well. And so perhaps we move to a little bit of a wrap-up on what we've heard this morning from all of our various contributors. Some notes I've made, sharing with you some of the key headlines. We heard from Minister Poots, and we're delighted in Northern Ireland to now be at the point where the draft climate change bill has been laid before the Northern Ireland Executive, and we look forward to that progressing through the various stages of legislation. Dr. Bergman, as I said earlier, a call to action, reminding us all that it's we who are creating this situation, it's we who have to fix it, reminding us of the urgency. And of course, as she said, if it is a big hoax, well, then we've made a better place as we go through the process over the next couple of years. But of course, it isn't a big hoax. To Dr. Barry O'Dwyer in UCC, who talked not just about the flood risk to cities, which we've often heard through this process, but also the related health risk to our population, to our people, to the communities that we serve up and down this island. My thanks to my colleague, Stephen Reid from Ards and North Down Borough Council, who set out the structures that exist currently in Northern Ireland, the cooperation and partnerships between councils, with Climate NI and with Sustainable NI. And thanks for the unashamed plug for the work in Derry City and Strabane District Council in the Northwest, and of course our colleagues in the Belfast Climate Commission. To Paddy for the remarkable progress that is being made in the Republic of Ireland through the establishment of the CARO structures, the training of nearly 30,000 staff, as we've heard, the 31 adaptation strategies and the over 2,000 actions that are already being monitored and reported on a regular basis. I think that's very encouraging and inspirational to hear. And of course, to John for the work that John set out and has been leading on in Portlaoise, the fantastic figures, the harnessing of the communities in Portlaoise and the energy that has been created to deliver on those objectives. And I think as we in Northern Ireland in particular are beginning a rollout of an ambitious city deal programme right across all of our council areas, it's really important to hear of the example in Glasgow, where you in Glasgow are using this opportunity to deliver systematic transformation, to tackle inequalities, to create new jobs as additional byproducts to also tackling climate change. And I think that's something that we can all learn from this. It's a whole system approach as we move forward. And of course, finishing with Mark and the very positive, upbeat sense of where we're going in the future and the certainty that our grid have that we will deliver what we're required to do, and that journey of winning hearts and minds as we go forward. So certainly for me this morning, I'd like to thank all of the contributors, to our ministers, to those who are here in Kilkenny Castle. As we draw proceedings to a close, it's been an inspiring, thought-provoking, and a hugely interesting morning. I thank all of you. I thank the team at Cooperation Ireland on behalf of all of my colleagues north and south for the huge work that has gone on behind the scenes to make this happen today. As always, there is a huge amount of work to ensure it all runs very smoothly. It's not the end. We look forward to continuing the conversation. We began this conversation at our sessions last year. We're delighted to be at least in hybrid form this year, and we hope next year all to be fully present, cycling, walking, or sustainably travelling to whatever venue we can set up for continuing that conversation. I think what we've heard this morning should encourage us all in local government. We in local government are very well used to solving complex problems, to working in a multi-agency, cross-sectoral environment, working in the front line, full glare of accountability and transparency. So I have every confidence that we in local government can help play a big part in solving these huge complex problems and working with partners right across this island and beyond to make that difference. I'm very excited by it. I know all of our local authorities are up for the challenge. Our staff right across all sections of councils are contributing to this huge conundrum and this complex issue. Contact us, please, with your thoughts and suggestions as to how we might take this conversation forward. We want to hear from you. And most of all, we thank you this morning for participating in this excellent session. We look forward to next year's event. And in the meantime, have a good day. Thank you, and slán.